Hello and welcome to 6 Part. Today I'm gonna start a new series, What If Deku Became the Bane? Part 1. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you'll never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Young Izuku Midoriya was struck by the words, "No, I don't think you can be a hero without a quirk." It wasn't what it always came down to. Without power, you couldn't accomplish anything. In this world, power was everything. Those who liked him included Kachan and All Might, while others didn't. Izuku grabbed hold of All Might and suddenly found himself sprinting down the stairs of the building he had landed on. His dream was so easily dashed by his hero of a lifetime. Izuku had always felt helpless, but this was the weakest he had ever felt. He ran with his legs burning and his lungs heaving until he reached home and was standing in front of the door to the apartment he shared with his mother after bursting through the stairwell door to the lobby. Izuku staggered as silently as he could into the apartment on wobbly legs, panting his sweat-soaked shirt. Izuku kicked off his shoes in the foyer, made his way to his room, slipped past his mother without her noticing, and closed the door. He cried as he leaned back against the door and slowly slid to the floor, asking, "Why am I so weak?" His idol, All Might memorabilia, was all around him. Knowing that that proud smile was a genuine form of self-gratification, he couldn't bear to look at it. Izuku snarled, lunged forward to his desk, grabbed the closest All Might figurine, and threw it against the wall, watching its fragments shatter. "You revel in your power, don't you, All Might? After all, you're the symbol of peace." Before his feet lay All of Might, broken. As a thought came to him, he uttered, "If only I could do that to the real All Might." After all, didn't people say that knowledge was power? Power was the status quo in this world, and there were numerous ways to achieve it. Izuku brought up exercise routines while seated in his computer chair. Izuku shook his head, saying, "I'll be powerful not just in body but also in mind. I'll show Kachan." He needed to let go of that fictitious friendship. The only reason Izuku thought the two were still friends was because Katsuki was a jerk. "I'll show Katsuki and All Might, that power is subjective." As a result, Izuku pushed himself to the limit both mentally and physically. He trained himself hard throughout the summer, lifting weights, running, and studying for many hours on everything from biology and chemistry to tactics and martial arts. He also took a special interest in how the human body can be forced to develop, such as by releasing the brain's muscle-limiting mechanisms. During his research, Izuku discovered stories about a drug called Trigger that enhanced a user's quirk to its maximum potential. Izuku's small frame was bulked up significantly with muscle coupling, and his growth spurt took him from 5 feet to 5 feet 11 inches. He was barely recognizable, especially with his unruly green hair cut into a crew cut. Izuku stood up, closed his laptop, and grabbed his jacket before leaving his room in black cargo pants, boots, and a gray t-shirt stretched taut across his chest. He bumped into his mother, nearly knocking her down before he grabbed her and pulled her to her feet with one hand. "This is exactly what I need," Izuku said, looking at his laptop while performing push-ups. He then brought up all the recent events and displayed them on a map, giving him a fairly solid search area. After all, like any drug, Trigger had to have a dealer. "Oh, Izuku. Are you going somewhere?" She had hardly seen her little boy since school ended, and he spent all of his time in his room either working out or reading thick books on obscure topics. Inko had asked him where he had gotten the money to buy all of his weights, and his response had astounded her. "I sold all that All Might junk." Izuku had idolized All Might, so learning that he had sold everything and labeled it junk left Inko speechless. She felt as though she was living with a stranger, and it was painful to think of her only child in that way. He slid past her and went to the front door to put on his shoes, saying, "Yeah, I'll be back later, don't wait for me." "Izuku, you know I love you, right?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder at her son. Izuku paused for a second, then got up and said, "I know, Mom." He left the city where the last Trigger incident had happened, closing the front door behind him without ever turning around. As he did so, he looked through the numerous pictures the media had taken in an attempt to identify the dealer. It was a long shot, but Izuku had studied human behavior and, despite his lack of expertise, he thought he was capable of spotting something unusual. Izuku stood outside the construction cordon, staring at the devastation in front of him. It seemed that this Trigger incident had caused a sound quirk to go haywire, sending massive shockwaves across the area and bringing down several buildings. Izuku compared the photo to the actual scene and noticed something in a video. A man in a suit carrying a briefcase, which is as normal as it gets these days, but the way the man handled himself, while everyone else was running and screaming, he stood motionless and watched. Izuku grinned and said, Found you. He went through his photos once more, now that he knew who to look for. He was walking along the sidewalk feeling pretty proud of himself because he had almost sold out of his trigger. Of course, his orders were to give the stuff out, but why give when you can sell? Besides, the drug was still out there, so he had to be careful that if the boss found out he was selling this stuff, he would be turned inside out. He was going to call it a night this evening because he was going to be going to bed early. As he passed an alleyway, two hands sprang out of the shadows, grabbed him by the collar, and slammed him against the alley's back wall. The force was enough to drive the air out of his lungs. He gasped as he looked up at the big shadowy figure who was coming toward him. The figure moved like water, avoiding the shot, and then kicked him in the mouth. Mayuri's reaction was to gather saliva in his mouth and spit. His quirk was actually self-explanatory, his saliva was corrosive. He felt his teeth break as blood flooded his mouth, and as he tried to scream, he felt pieces of tooth fall down his throat before an iron grip closed around his throat and lifted him against the wall. Listen carefully because I'm only going to say this once. You will give me your current trigger and a quarter of each order you receive because I now own you. If you don't, I'll find you again and you'll have more than a few broken teeth to worry about. Drop it in this alley. If you agree, shake your head now. Mayuri glared down at this guy, but he couldn't see well because his vision was swimming from the kick to his jaw, and the darkened alley wasn't helping him either. He would spit at him, but his trick only worked when he had pure saliva in his mouth. With all the blood in his mouth, his acid wouldn't be more than a slight itch, and this guy was clearly strong enough to fold him up and put him in his pocket if he felt like it. Mayuri shook his head and was immediately dropped to the ground, and the man grabbed his suitcase to open it before stopping and throwing it to him. Mayuri pursed his lips in disappointment. If he had attempted to pry open the case, it would have shocked the living daylights out of him. The guy stuffed the vials in one of his cargo pants pockets and left, leaving Mayuri clutching his mangled mouth in agony as he spat out more pieces of broken teeth. Whoever that guy is, I hope I never see him again. Fucking strength quirks. Mayuri inserted his finger into the key lock, allowing it to scan his fingerprint and pop open. He handed over the 5 remaining vials right away. When Izuku returned home at 3 in the morning, he saw that the light was on in the living room. He kicked off his shoes, turned the corner, and looked at his mother sleeping on the couch while an infomercial was playing on the TV. He sighed, turned off the TV, picked up his mother's bridal gown, and then turned off the light. Izuku laid Inko on her bed and covered her with the comforter, knowing that what he was going to do would cause her great pain, but he had to do it because if he stayed here, he would never be able to complete the tasks at hand. Izuku went to his room and started packing, taking the money that was left over from the sale of his All Might crap and a few pairs of clothes. Before leaving for the last time, Izuku took one last look around the room before leaving. Now that he had trigger, he could start in earnest. He would stand at the top of not just heroes, but villains as well. He would be the absolute power. Izuku looked at the house he had set up for himself after leaving his mother 2 months ago. He had discovered an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town that had been used as a production facility by a small drug ring. After calling the police, the gang was either arrested or dispersed, leaving him a nice place to set up shop. With all the lab equipment the police had taken, Izuku had started working right away on dismantling the trigger and re-engineering it for his own use as a super steroid. Fortunately, Mayuri had fallen in line right away, providing him with a steady supply of trigger to work with, and before he knew it, 2 months had gone by. Izuku was no chemical genius, but with what he'd learned since his meeting with All Might, he'd made it this far. Izuku smirked as he swirled the vial of neon green liquid and said, "All that's left is to find a delivery system." He sat at a workbench wearing jeans and boots without a shirt, looking at what he'd come up with. He found peace in the repetitive motions of exercise, whether it be push-ups, crunches, or chin-ups. Izuku turned onto his back and looked up at the ceiling, which was covered in cobwebs. His eyes wandered across it, not really looking at anything, before he locked onto the window. Smoke was wafting by it, and that smoke gave him an idea. What if I made something like nicotine patches? Izuku said, sitting up. I could inject it, but that's too troublesome and it's not like my enemies are going to give me a chance to shoot up. Plus, having to carry a bunch of needles around is too dangerous. Alright, let's get to work, because after this it's time for a test drive, he said, nodding his head before leaping to his feet. As she did every day, Inko Midoriya sat in her son's room, staring down at a picture of a newborn Izuku, her little miracle, an inside joke between her and her husband Hisashi. They had tried for so long to have a baby, but nothing seemed to work, and then just as they were about to give up, she missed her period. Reading that she was pregnant had been the best day of her life, right after the day she'd married Hisashi. Izuku was so small when she first held him, and it was difficult to compare that baby to the man she'd known before he left. Inko was so engrossed in her memoirs about her baby boy that she failed to notice Mitsuki Bakugo enter Izuku's room through the doorway. Mitsuki glanced at her best friend or the shell that had replaced her since her son vanished. Inko and Mitsuki had been friends since Mitsuki moved in with her husband. The fact that both women were expecting their first child helped to strengthen their bond, and Inko's cool-headedness complemented Mitsuki's fiery personality. Mitsuki broke Inko's reverie by saying, "Inko, you need to eat something, doll." As she met the blonde's eyes, Inko's pain was like a gut punch to Mitsuki, even though she had seen it every day for the past 2 months. It began when Inko came over to her house to ask if her son was with Katsuki, knowing that the two boys had been friends before her son turned into the haughty jerk of today. When Mitsuki informed her that Izuku was not present, Inko broke down in tears on her doorstep, and Mitsuki brought her in to hear Inko's account of how Izuku had changed horrifyingly over the summer before finally going missing one night 2 months ago. Since Inko had already called the police to report her son missing, they had not yet found anything, and Inko's depression grew worse every day until Mitsuki had to call Hizashi to explain the situation. Hizashi was supposed to arrive any day now, but work prevented him from going to his wife's aid right away or something like that. In all honesty, Mitsuki couldn't understand what was so damn important that would prevent a man from comforting his wife about their missing child. Mitsuki shook her head and walked over to help Inko to her feet, noticing how her pink sweater and pants hung loosely across her shrinking frame. "Come on, Inko, let's get you something to eat." Mitsuki forced a smile on her face as Inko shuffled beside her into the kitchen and sat at the table while Mitsuki fixed her something simple, knowing that it would be difficult to get Inko to take a bite of anything. After assembling a sandwich, Mitsuki returned to the table with it and a glass of water, placing them both in front of Inko. Inko did not respond, continuing to stare at the baby picture of Izuku. Mitsuki sighed and sat down, preparing herself for the battle ahead. "You are my best friend, Inko, and I only care about what's best for you, don't you know that?" "All right, I'll just say it out loud. This isn't healthy, Inko. You need help. You don't eat much, and I can tell you're not sleeping because of the bags under your eyes. This is not your fault, so you cannot punish yourself for it." "Yes, it is," Inko shouted, slamming her palms on the table as she stood up staring down at Mitsuki. "This is my fault, Mitsuki. I gave up on him." Inko sank back in her chair and said, "He asked me, and I was at a loss for words, so I just said, 'I'm sorry,' as if that would ease his pain. He left because I lacked the courage to say yes, but I also lacked the heart to say no." As Inko gazed down at the photo of her son, tears fell down her cheeks. "He quit on me like I quit on him." Mitsuki, who believed that no mother was more encouraging than Inko, was perplexed by what Inko was telling her. "What did he ask you, Inko?" Mitsuki wondered what question could have triggered the current state of guilt that Inko was experiencing. The question every kid asks Mitsuki, could he be a hero? That fucking loser, what does he think he's doing making his mom cry like that? Katsuki Bakugo was strolling down the street, not really going anywhere, but it's not like he was searching for that damn nerd either. No, Katsuki wasn't desperately looking for Izuku Midoriya. "I'm going to split Deku's face in two the next time I see him." Katsuki kicked a pebble off the sidewalk as he walked, his head swirling with thoughts of Deku and the last thing he'd said to him before he disappeared. "Here's how you can get a quirk, Deku. Pray to jump off the school and have one in your next life." Oh my god, what if he did? The image of Izuku's body striking the pavement filled Katsuki with icy fear. No, Deku would never do something foolish like that. He started running in the direction of the school, growling. "Even without a quirk, Izuku was better than me, and if he had one, he would be out of my league." Katsuki jumped the fence of his school, and since the building was closed for summer break, no one would even know if Izuku was dead around here. However, no matter how hard or how long he searched, there was no sign of Izuku's body, so why didn't he feel relieved? On the contrary, he felt worse now that his friend was out there somewhere. What am I saying? I was no friend to Izuku, I was just his bully. His life was made a living hell by a jealous jerk who teased him. "Izuku, I'm sorry. I sincerely apologize." As the sun sank over his agony, Katsuki repeatedly yelled that. Izuku entered a clothing store that specialized in creating clothing for people with heteromorphic quirks. Wearing a blue t-shirt, jeans, boots, and a baseball cap pulled low over his head, he walked to the back of the store near the changing rooms where two security guards were waiting. They both moved aside as Izuku approached, knocking 3 times quickly, pausing twice, and then knocking 3 more times on one of the stalls. The stall opened to reveal a staircase, which Izuku descended, leading to another door that was opened from the inside, revealing a large office that was tastefully furnished with a large oak desk at the back and 2 couches on the left and right. Izuku turned to face the man at the desk, who was dressed in a black suit with a golden tie, but what really caught his attention was that he was a humanoid cat, with fur striped in light and dark orange, and vertical pupils nestled in green irises that resembled Izuku's. This man was the owner of the store above, but he was also the underworld broker known as Fat Cat, a fitting moniker given his peculiarity and the fact that this cat was not going without food. "I am, it's good to see you." Izuku had been using the name I am as an alias because of the circles he was now frequented. A week or so after leaving his mother's house, Izuku met Fat Cat. Fat Cat had a thief in his midst who had stolen a sizable amount of his money, so he obviously couldn't let this go unpunished. He put a hit out on his former employee, but no one seemed to be able to track him down. When Izuku brought him in, everything changed, and they have been working together ever since. Getting right to the point, Izuku replied, "I need to fight Fat Cat." Since they were business associates, there was no need to engage in small talk, and since Izuku hadn't perfected his American accent, he had been working on a further layer of his disguise. If he appeared to be non-Japanese, people were more likely to let things slip, and if someone were to describe him, they would undoubtedly think he was an American rather than a native of Japan. "Well, the time has come. I thought you would never agree to a fight here." Since they first met, Fat Cat had been attempting to persuade me to participate in his events after I had declined his offer of employment. The man was a mystery. He had only ever asked for the thief's bounty and nothing else. In fact, this was only the second time he had ever spoken to him in person. All previous conversations had taken place over the phone. "I actually have an event planned at the docks tonight, so you're in luck. I don't want this to get out, so I'll send you the warehouse number at 9. Head to the docks at 10 o'clock. I don't think you're a snitch, but you can't be too careful, can you?" He needed to prepare for tonight's first test run of his steroid, so Izuku nodded before pivoted on his heel and left again. As he stepped up to the warehouse door, which was opened for him to let out the noise of a large crowd inside, Izuku arched an eyebrow and looked at his watch, which read 9:45. The text had arrived just as Fat Cat had said it would, informing him that it was Warehouse 18, the very warehouse he was now standing outside of, but there was no sound other than the lapping waves. The building was obviously very well soundproofed. As he entered, he lifted his gym bag higher on his shoulder and saw the crowd cheering around a raised concrete arena where 2 women were fighting. An African-American woman wearing a striped black and blue tank top, matching shorts, and gray sneakers stood on one end of the arena with thick black dreadlocks that reached the small of her back. Her dreadlocks rose in 2 large fists, which she threw at her opponent. The girl wore a yellow bomber jacket over black and yellow striped leggings, and Izuku thought her opponent was wearing some sort of opaque cloak, but the cloak flared out into 2 pairs of wings, sending her flying and away from the groping hands. Wings zipped through the air, narrowly avoiding her opponent's grasping hands, before soaring straight into the ceiling, which her opponent chased after all the way until she kicked off the ceiling and dove straight down, planting both of her feet into Dread's face, sending her to the pavement with the sound of breaking bone. The broker said, "Well, the rules are simple. Quirks are allowed as much as you like, but no weapons like knives or guns unless you know that's your quirk." Izuku turned away from the spectacle and saw Fat Cat approaching him. "I'm glad you could make it. Come with me. I'll show you to the changing room and explain the rules on the way." Izuku silently followed him as he spoke. As they reached the changing area, he grinned and said, "Also, no support gear, we're here for quirks, not tech, that's another show." He turned to face I Am and said, "Gotta check the bag I Am." Izuku held it out to Fat Cat, who opened it and examined Izuku's equipment. "Got you your own room too since you're new and all." "Yes, this works. Now, prepare yourself because your fight will soon come to an end given the current situation." He winked and clicked his tongue as he left, closing the door behind him. "I'm betting on you, and don't worry you'll get that smoking habit." "I bet you are." Izuku tossed his bag on the bench and shrugged out of his hood, revealing a black muscle shirt and his usual cargo pants and boots. He reached into his bag and took out a wrestler's mask, a full-face mask with no mouth hole, mostly black except for the white face and green one-sided lenses over the eyes. The last piece of equipment he had was a pair of fingerless gloves with steel-enforced knuckles. After putting them on, he smashed his fists together, filling the room with the sound of metal clattering. He pulled out a nicotine box and said, "Now for the most important part." The patches inside were ones that Izuku had designed, so he pulled one out and lifted his shirt and placed it directly over his heart, slapping it into place to break the seal. For a moment, nothing happened, and Izuku was afraid he might have made a mistake, but then he felt a searing pain enter his chest as the drug began to work, flowing through his body like acid. Izuku knelt over the wooden bench, gripping the sides, feeling his muscles grow beneath his skin until they were nearly tearing through it, but it stopped as soon as it had begun. Izuku let go of the bench after noticing that he had torn out large pieces of it with his fingers. He looked in the mirror and saw that he was different from the man who had entered moments before. He was at least a few inches taller, making him over 6 feet, and his muscles bulged with every movement, pressing his veins against his, giving him a faint green glow. It worked. I succeeded. There was a knock on the door, so he yelled, "Dude, you're awake." Izuku walked out to the roar of the crowd after shouting through the door and smashing the doorknob in his hands. Death Arms got up from his desk at his agency, extinguished his cigarette, and proceeded to the door after finishing his hero worksheet. He reached for the doorknob before one of his sidekicks flung it open, saying, "Death Arms, sir, we have new information in. I guess heroes don't need sleep." Death Arms moaned at this development as he yelled at his sidekick, a young man dressed in blue jeans and a black shirt with yellow and black armbands. He was about to leave when his sidekick told him about the intel's nature. "If it's not something big, let someone else handle it." "It's Fat Cat, sir." Fat Cat, as some would say, was Death Arms' white whale. He had been pursuing that bastard for years, but he was as cunning as he was portly, so this seemed to be his best chance. Death Arms turned and grabbed the paper as he read it. "All people should go to the docks, tonight. I will finally skin that cat." As his sidekick ran off to gather everyone, Death Arms yelled, "You've got your last slice of lasagna, Garfield." He was looking out his window toward the docks. The announcer walked alongside the ring to begin the fight, and Izuku entered it facing his opponent, a man who appeared to have a bull quirk, with large forward-facing horns and hooves instead of feet, and even a large nose ring to fit his motif. "I present to you, criminals and crooks, another fantastic battle. Black Bull, the returning fighter, is on the left. He was clearly the favorite to win, and the crowd went crazy. And on the right we have mysterious newcomer I Am." The majority of the audience jeered, but Izuku didn't mind because this was only a test run and he would never return once he had what he needed. "All right, let's start the fight." Izuku took his stance, bracing for the impact with his left foot forward and his right foot behind him, while Bull wasted no time in hurrying his opponent in an attempt to gore him with his massive horns. "I'm going to mow you down, boy," Bull yelled just before colliding with Izuku. Izuku caught hold of Bull's horns as they touched, astonished by the lack of force, and lifted Bull off his feet before bringing him down with a full frontal body slam. Izuku thought, "I'm not done, I want more," as he reached down and grabbed Bull by the horns, only to repeatedly smash his knee into his face, feeling Bull's face give way under the crushing blows until his horns snapped from the force, letting Black Bull roll across and out of the arena. "This is it," he thought, "this is the feeling of my power. The power I crafted with my own 2 hands." Izuku looked down at Bull's prone form as he attempted to stand up. As the front of the warehouse was blown in, the crowd fell silent in the face of the brutal performance they had witnessed. Pro heroes, nobody move. People were frantically trying to flee or repel the heroes as the warehouse erupted in activity. Since Izuku wasn't sure how long his drug would last and wasn't ready for the pros to learn about him just yet, he decided it would be best to flee when he saw Fat Cat making a break for it. He quickly took off, easily catching up to Fat Cat thanks to his improved muscles. In the locker room, Fat Cat was attempting to squeeze through a window that was clearly too small for him. Fat Cat, staring at Izuku, fell out of the window. "I Am, help me get out of here, please. Death Arms has it in for me. If you get me out, I'll get you whatever you want. Money, girls, drugs, whatever, I'll get it." Izuku couldn't resist the opportunity to shackle Fat Cat with a debt, even though he didn't really want to help him. Izuku snatched up his bag, cocked his fist back, and smashed a big hole in the wall that both of them ran through. "Stand back." Death Arms had seen Fat Cat right away, and the broker had fled as well, followed by a villain wearing a mask. As he pursued Fat Cat, he heard a loud crash in the back room. Death Arms kicked in the door, and he saw a large hole there, probably caused by the masked man who had been pursuing Fat Cat. "Take care of these guys, I'm going after Fat Cat," he yelled, barreling through the low-level thugs. Death Arms saw 2 figures running toward a tangle of shipping containers as he leapt through the hole into the chilly night. The professional yelled, "If they get in there, I'll never find them," and grabbed a locker from the changing room, throwing it as he ran and watched it crash in front of the fleeing pair. When a locker almost crushed Fat Cat, he let out a terrified yowl. Turning around, he yelled, "That bastard nearly killed me," as Izuku's bag was flung in his face. He turned back to face Death Arms and said calmly, "I'll hold him here, take that, and get out of here." Just as Death Arms arrived, Fat Cat bounded away on all fours with the bag on his back, demonstrating that he didn't need to be reminded twice. Death Arms cracked his knuckles and remarked, "I feel sorry for villains like you. You have such loyalty to garbage." Death Arms felt his cheek split open as he dodged to the side and drove a fist into the villain's side, feeling as though he had just punched steel. "This is your only chance, Surrend," he said. Izuku had to press the attack using what he knew about Death Arms because he didn't have time to listen to this hero and his time limit was about to expire. Izuku closed in quickly, denying Death Arms any space. He was aware that Death Arms had broken his left leg a few years prior after he had caught some falling debris. Taking advantage of this, he punched Izuku in the gut while he was watching the pro dodge to the left. As soon as he landed, Izuku kicked his knee inward and felt it snap. Izuku was hit on the right side of the head by Death Arms' Hail Mary right hook, which smashed into his mask's lens as he screamed in agony. Izuku took a step back, his brow and eyelid being cut by the plastic. His bloodied green eye, which appeared to glow in the dark to Death Arms, was visible when he removed the lens from his mask. The expert collapsed to his side, examining his fractured limb. Izuku stomped onto his hand, breaking the bones there as he reached for the radio on his belt. Izuku's fist crashed into the pro's face, sending the back of his head into the concrete as he went to yell in agony once more. "I feel sorry for you heroes who talk about justice but don't know what true justice is. The only justice in this world is that of the strong. Only the powerful are just and you Death Arms are neither. I am the bane of your hero society. You made me poisoning me with your hypocritical venom, but it didn't kill me like all you wanted it to. No, I used that venom you all spit at me. It's coursing through my veins and makes me more powerful than any of you can imagine." Before grabbing the pro's arms from behind and stepping on his back while exerting all of his strength until he felt both arms dislocate, Izuku kicked him in the side, rolling him onto his stomach. By this point, Death Arms' world was whirling in and out of focus as he gave in to the agony of his wounds. Though he had barely felt it before fainting, he knew that his arms had been dislocated. Green steam rose from Izuku's body, making him shrink as his muscles grew back to normal, and he left the declaration of war he had created using Death Arms. Death Arms' sidekicks appeared, and he vanished. Unbeknownst to Izuku, Fat Cat had been secretly observing and recording the fight, primarily to gain leverage over IM. Now, he knew what to do with it. He would post his Death Arms' defeat. Fat Cat was able to spot an opportunity when it presented itself. He made good on his promise to IM after sneaking back to his hiding place to upload what he had seen. No, not IM, Bane. When Death Arms' sidekicks arrived at the scene of the battle, they were astounded by what they saw. The hero's once proud arms were pinned to a shipping container, and the metal of the container ripped out and punctured them twice. He then hung limply, as if he had been crucified. His arms were covered in bruises, as though they had been repeatedly smashed. His face was a complete mess, with blood streaming from his mouth and both eyes swollen shut. The blood pooling on the ground beneath the gloomy scene was exacerbated by bones sticking out of the skin of his left leg. Screamed throughout the night, Death Arms, a three-eyed, purple-haired female news anchor, was shown on a TV in the corner of the underground bar. A picture of the villain was displayed on the screen along with the words, "Good evening ladies and gentlemen, we come to you today from NHA News Studio. It has been a month since the brutal attack on pro-hero Death Arms by the new villain named Bane. Authorities in conjunction with heroes are still pursuing this villain, but as of yet no arrests have been made." One of the two people in the bar turned off the television. One was examining a laptop from behind the bar. Kurogiri was the villain, and his only facial characteristic was his glowing yellow eyes, which gave the impression that he was a living cloud of darkness. Kurogiri's ghostly fingers clicked across the keyboard in front of him, and he was wearing a server's vest and neck armor. He heard a voice coming from the direction of the only other occupant while he was working. He sighed to himself because he had been hearing the same speech over and over again for the past month, to the extent that he could recite it verbatim. "I feel sorry for you heroes who talk about justice, but don't know what true justice is. The only justice in this world is that of the strong. Only the powerful are just and you Death Arms are neither. I am the bane of your hypocritical society. You made me by poisoning me with your hypocritical venom, but it didn't kill me like all you wanted it to. No, I used that venom you all spat at me. It's coursing through my veins and makes me more powerful than any of you can imagine." As Bane started to demonstrate Death Arms, there was laughter. Tamura Shigaraki laughed more as he watched the video and exclaimed, "He's incredible, Kurogiri. I want to meet him." Tamura had crimson eyes, light blue hair, and scars on the right eyelid and the left side of his severely chapped lips. He was dressed in jeans, red sneakers, and a black long-sleeve shirt. Kurogiri's eyes rolled when the same question that had been asked of him over and over for the past month was asked. Tamura yelled, "Haven't you found him yet, Kurogiri?" Kurogiri heard Tamura's nails rake across the dry skin of his neck and replied, "Calm yourself, Tamura Shigaraki. This is a complicated task, finding someone by a single video. It will take more time. The video is starting to bore him, which will eventually cause a destructive outburst." Kurogiri turned back to the computer, thinking that he would have to order more furniture for the bar. He had been searching dark web chat rooms for information on this Bane character for the past month, but all of his efforts had been fruitless. Kurogiri's screen displayed an encrypted message. He paused to read the brief message it contained after decrypting it. "Why are you searching for Bane, and who are you?" Bane's speech replayed in the background as Kurogiri paused to type a message. "My employer wants to meet with Bane, and my name is Kurogiri from the League of Villains. How can I be sure you're real?" The messenger, who remained anonymous, responded. Kurogiri gave the screen a fierce look. It was a pain to deal with, but there was no insurance in this industry, and criminals were understandably wary in this day and age. Kurogiri would prefer to avoid all of this unnecessary waste, but for the time being he would have to play the game. "How do you want me to demonstrate my worth?" Kurogiri clenched his fist over the keyboard in response. "I'll give Bane your location if you send it to me." Kurogiri hissed in annoyance at being asked to fully reveal both himself and Tamura. Without the master's consent, he was unable to do that. Kurogiri was unaware that Tamura had crept up behind him and been listening in on their conversation. Before Kurogiri could stop him, Tamura took advantage of Kurogiri's hesitation and reached around the gaseous villain, typed in their address, and sent it. Kurogiri's head expanded into a cloud of rage. Another message appeared as Kurogiri raged, and it contained just 4 words. "Why did you do that? You've completely exposed us to whoever this is. It could be the police assembling a strike team right now. We'll communicate." The entire chat box was deleted, and the connection was broken. Tamura grinned broadly and exclaimed, "See, now we'll get to meet Bane." Kurogiri considered throwing Tamura into the sea, but he suppressed the impulse. Despite being far too immature for his age, Tamura was valuable to his master and could not hurt him. Kurogiri replied, "For our sake I hope you're right, Tamura Shigaraki." He then went in search of a glass to clean in the hopes of reducing his stress. Fat Cat placed his paws behind his head and leaned back from the computer on his desk. He pulled his work phone out of his desk drawer and said, "League of Villains, hun?" to his empty office. All of his contacts from the Underworld were on this phone, with Bane at the top. As Fat Cat dialed Bane's number, he said, "Well, it couldn't hurt I suppose, and it's really up to him if he shows or not. No skin off my bones if he doesn't." At home, Izuku was performing chin-ups while wearing 2 100-pound weights chained around his waist. After helping him get away, Fat Cat had truly delivered on his promise. He had planned to kill the broker for exposing him to the world before he was ready after learning about the video Fat Cat had posted about him the following day, but in the week it took for Fat Cat to get in touch with him, he had grown to value the broker's unjustified help. The villains worshipped Bane and the populace was terrified of him, but most importantly, the heroes were also afraid. It was all worthwhile because he could see it in the eyes of every hero he saw on TV and in their eyes when he was walking down the street. He was therefore more than willing to let the broker live when Fat Cat called and informed him that he had found a place for Bane. Fat Cat had purchased a small house near Dagoba Beach for a great price because it was essentially overlooking a dump, which also meant that there was very little chance of anyone coming out here because of the daily accumulation of trash. Fat Cat's men had done the renovations themselves. Even though Izuku didn't really care for nice furniture and creature comforts, all he would really need was a place to sleep, a refrigerator, a place to work out, and a lab to mix his venom, as he was now calling it. It was still nice to have. For the past month, he had been reworking venom, making it more potent, and testing its new limits using the lab supplies he had moved from his previous residence. Izuku could currently only take 3 doses at a time. Any more and he would lose all ability to think clearly. The venom also accelerated his recovery and strengthened his resistance to harm. Nothing particularly remarkable, but as long as the venom was flowing through him, he wouldn't have to worry about getting hurt. Izuku's phone rang while he was working out, and he fell to the ground with a loud thud. He then undid the weights, causing them to fall to the ground. As he wiped the perspiration from his body, he picked up his phone and put it on speaker. He sat on his bed and reached for a big water bottle on the floor, asking, "What is it, Fat Cat?" From the speaker of the phone came Fat Cat's voice. I was contacted by a guy named Kurogiri from a group calling themselves the League of Villains, says his boss wants to meet you. Izuku climbed out of bed and began performing push-ups, asking, why? He said, didn't ask sorry about that, figured I'd pass on the invitation to you. His phone buzzed to notify him of a text message. Izuku grunted and got up to check the address. I just sent over the address of where they want to meet. Place is called the Mahjong Bar. I'm sure this isn't a trap or anything. I've had some of my guys scope out the area before calling you, and they'll be nearby just in case shit goes sideways. Izuku said, okay, I'll think it over. He hung up after giving the matter some thought. Izuku had been considering assembling a group of people to support him for some time. After all, heroes have aides, so why couldn't he have his own organization? He seemed to have a lot of warm bodies to choose from in this league of villains. He asked himself, what could it hurt? As he put on a pair of jeans, a t-shirt, boots, a hat, and some sunglasses before leaving the house and locking the door behind him. Izuku saw a missing person poster on a nearby light pole as he started to walk into the city on his way to the train station. He approached it, confronting it with an old photo of himself. He turned away after glancing at the awkward, ashamed child he had once been. The only thing he would have gained from tearing it down was unwelcome attention. I've changed. I'm strong now instead of that weak kid. Izuku started to move more quickly, as though his former self's eyes were staring him in the back. He was only able to get rid of that annoying sensation when he got on the train. Izuku arrived at the bar without much delay after disembarking from the train, descending the stairs, and opening the door. All Might and Kamui Woods were standing outside a hospital room. Kamui Woods was dressed in his full hero outfit, while All Might was wearing a black t-shirt and green jeans. The two were watching Death Arms try to lift a barbell while he was still healing. From the side, they could see that the total weight was 1,200 pounds, with the weights totaling 600 pounds. Death Arms, accompanied by two of the hospital's most powerful orderlies, lay on the bench and started to raise the barbell. As Death Arms strained under the weight, the two pros watched, and eventually the two orderlies had to help him place it back on its rest. It was pathetic. The punching hero should have considered a little more than 1,000 pounds to be nothing. He used to have no trouble lifting that with one hand. All Might clenched his fists and turned to face Kamui Woods. As she left a nearby room and went to see the other two heroes, the recovery girl said, the diagnosis is not good. After a brief pause, the recovery girl explained, Death Arms suffered severe damage to his arms. Shattered bones are one thing, but having two jagged pieces of metal rammed through them didn't help. Even with my quirk helping him, he'll still need at least another 2 weeks of bed rest. Stones fell into Kamui's and All Might's stomachs, causing, he has lasting damage to his arms, so much so that I'd say his strength has been halved at least. Death Arms' strength was his main selling point as a hero. If it were diminished that much, he would not be able to continue to be a hero, at least not in the same sense. What the other two heroes couldn't or wouldn't say, the recovery girl said, you both know what that means, which is why I suggested that Death Arms retire. All Might was startled when Kamui Woods exclaimed, how could you say that? In that room is a hero, one of the finest heroes I've had the pleasure to know and work with. Death Arms and Kamui Woods had been friends for a long time, having joined the hero scene at roughly the same time and working several cases together. They were more than just co-workers. They were true friends, and it was too much for him to bear the thought that his friend might not be able to continue working. He's already in pain from having lost to a villain and had it broadcast all over the world, and then you go in there and tell him to just give up. All Might put a hand on his shoulder and said, Kamui, please, this is a hospital. As Kamui turned to face him, All Might remarked, besides, she might be right. As he emerged from the stairwell wearing his signature scarf and hero costume, Eraserhead said, what if Death Arms goes back out there with his strength compromised and tries to catch something that's just too heavy for him? He could injure himself or jeopardize a rescue. It's not fair, but that's the reality of it. Thinking otherwise would be irrational. With his back to Eraserhead, All Might released Kamui Woods. As Kamui Woods entered the hospital room to talk to Death Arms, All Might inquired, Aizawa, were you able to find out any information about Bane? Aizawa gave a headshake. Before Recovery Girl coughed lightly, Aizawa scratched his head and said, I was out there all night, I busted up 3 more fight clubs and a villain hideout, but nobody had any info on Bane. He's completely new to the scene. The only thing I know for sure is that he deals exclusively with Fat Cat, and nobody is rolling on the feline. I do have some good news. One of the villains caught by Death Arms' sidekicks was brought into this hospital for medical treatment. He's on the floor below us. A man named Tyson Ushi, but he went by Black Bull in the Fight Club. He actually fought Bane, and is a regular at this fight club which is said to be hosted by Fat Cat, so maybe he can give us the answers we need. As he left the Death Arms room and made his way to the elevator, Kamui Woods said, "Then let's go. I have some questions for him." None of the three professionals had the right to stop Kamui Woods from speaking with the criminal, but they were also unsure if it was a good idea to let him. Recovery Girl entered the room, her cane clacking against the tile, and said, "You three go ahead, I'll do some last-minute work on Death Arms before heading back to UA." Following Kamui, All Might and Eraserhead entered the elevator, rode it down one floor, and emerged to see two policemen outside a room that was identified as belonging to Black Bull. All Might said to the two officers, "Why don't you two go stretch your legs, gentlemen? We'd like a moment with the villain." They enthusiastically agreed and left down the hall. When Kamui Woods opened the door, he saw Tyson sitting on the edge of the bed. Although his face was still bruised, it was a significant improvement over when he had first entered. He had ground down the rest of his horns from the rough stumps they had been. Gazing at the three professionals, he snarled, "What the fuck do you want?" Kamui yelled, "I'm going to say this only once. What do you know about Bane?" "Tell me," Tyson chuckled at the hero's yelling. Kamui's arm sprang out in branches to slam Tyson against the hospital room's back wall. "Suck my dick, hero. I ain't no snitch. Besides, shouldn't you guys be writing get well notes to the cripple upstairs?" Kamui said. As Kamui's quirk was severed, he was bound by Aizawa's scarf and his arm went limp. "That man upstairs is more than you will ever be, you garbage villain. Now tell me about Bane or else I'll kill." Aizawa threw Kamui into All Might's powerful grasp and remarked, "You just blew your chance, Woods. All Might, make yourself useful and get him out of here." While being carried out, Kamui struggled in the number one hero's grasp and yelled, "You can't do this, Aizawa. Let me go, All Might." As the two pros argued outside, Aizawa closed the door and said, "Pardon me, Kamui Woods, but I am unable to save people from themselves." Before Tyson drove his knee into his stomach, Aizawa's scarf wrapped around him and she exclaimed, "That bastard could have killed me. I'll fucking sue his ass. Listen here, Tyson. I stopped Kamui from ripping you in half because he has a face in the public. Me on the other hand, I'm nobody. It's not much to me if I get reprimanded for roughing up a villain. Now tell me what you know or I'll start breaking bones." All Might was the only person left in the hospital room when Aizawa left, and he was not grinning. Kamui Woods had vanished. Aizawa scratched the scruff on his chin and sighed. "What did he say, Aizawa?" All Might was also perplexed as to why it was human to want to harm someone who had harmed them. Nothing much, he really didn't know anything, but what worries me is what he said. He told me that even if he did know who or where Bane was, he wouldn't say anything, which is odd after all Bane beat him to hell and back. Aizawa shook his head when he asked, "You think he's scared of Bane or maybe Fat Cat?" "Nope, this is pure loyalty. He said he owes Bane one for taking down a pro like he did. If he wasn't going to jail, he'd have gone to join Bane. This is dangerous if he can inspire this kind of loyalty from someone he's savaged. Imagine what he'll do to those who have no bias against him." All Might was shivering as a chill ran down his back. It is exactly as he began. All Might mused to himself. Aizawa and All Might headed to the elevator after saying, "Anyway, we need to get to UA. Those irrational entrance exams will be starting soon." Izuku noticed two men inside the bar. One was seated at the bar, and the other was standing behind it. Since one of them was a gas cloud shaped like a human, he assumed that they turned to face him. According to the black cloud, "I assume you are Bane?" Izuku moved deeper into the bar and closed the door behind him. Tamura exclaimed, "You're just a kid," as he stared at the stoic, muscular teenager next to Kurogiri, who had the ideal poker face to conceal his own shock due to his lack of facial features. Izuku turned on his heel and made his way to the door, saying, "If you asked me here to talk about my age, then we're done." As he quickly apologized for his rudeness, Tamura said, "No, wait, please stay, I'm sorry." All for One grinned on the other side of the camera. Tamura found it funny that he apologized to this child because he was never courteous to anyone but himself. All for One recalled his younger brother giving him the same expression all those years ago and remarked, "He's starstruck." Bane took a seat a few chairs away, and Tamura ordered, "Kurogiri, pour him a drink, whatever he wants." "Water is fine. I don't plan on being here long. Now what do you want with me?" Izuku had been able to conceal his Japanese heritage with ease by honing his American accent over the past month. As Bane started talking, Kurogiri placed a glass of ice water in front of him. A spider web of fractures appeared on Bane's glass, and there was a slight crack in the bar. "Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice, Bane." My associate and I are the founders of the League of Villains and our goal is to kill All Might. Tamura started to perspire as the malice in the room became unbearable. Bane, looking down at Kurogiri, put the Mist Man on the spot and asked, "And how do you plan to do that?" "We've learned that All Might will begin teaching at UA this semester. After getting certain information from the school, we will arrange an attack with our followers and kill the symbol of peace while also blacking the eye of the most famous hero school in all of Japan." Bane took a moment to think about it. All Might, this could be my chance to finally disprove that hypocrite, but it might end up being problematic if I associate my name with this League of Villains. Izuku suddenly thought of his former friend, Katsuki, who had desired to attend UA. Izuku grinned as he got to his feet and let go of the glass. He looked at the screen at the rear of the room and said, "I will join you." The sound crackled from the speakers as he said, "But I'm no underling, understand, Mystery Man?" Said All for One. "Very well, Bane, thank you for helping young Tamura." Izuku took a pen out of his pocket and wrote his number on the All Might poster that had been torn up. Izuku left the bar, took out his phone, and called Fat Cat, saying, "When you're ready." Izuku heard purring on the other end and asked, "When's my gear going to be ready?" Izuku rolled his eyes as he hung up and climbed into the waiting car. He saw the suitcase on the backseat and opened it, grinning as he looked at what was in front of him. "I take it the meeting went well." "I figured it would, and don't worry, your gear is in the car waiting for you. Just finished it actually. Didn't I tell you that I'd handle everything? A little trust goes a long way, Bane," he said. "Perfect." Since that day at school, Bakugo had made every effort to transform himself. He was no longer the boy who was exploding with pride, but rather had driven everyone away from him and concentrated solely on his desire to become a hero. Unlike before, however, he was not striving to be the best for himself. Rather, he was aiming to be the kind of hero Izuku had always desired. He aspired to be a better version of himself, and perhaps if he worked on becoming the hero Izuku had always envisioned, his friend would return and perhaps even forgive him. He had attempted to completely ignore everyone with his new classmates at UA, but he was unable to ignore one person. Ochako Uraraka was her name, and she reminded him so much of the friend he had lost that being around her hurt his body. Nevertheless, he made himself be around her in order to protect and make friends with her, just as he should have done for Izuku. He was calm and respectful with her, but he was cold and angry with everyone else in the class. This manly demeanor caught Ejiro Kirishima's attention after he witnessed Bakugo threaten to blow Mineta to pieces if he saw him looking at Ochako once more. Vice Class Representative Tenya Ida also took notice of the incident and condemned Bakugo's tactics, but he was powerless to change the outcome of Mineta's treatment by Bakugo. The fact that Ochako had a knight to protect her and keep Mineta away within a week while the other female students still had to deal with the perverted grape made the other girls in the class a little envious. When Bakugo and the other members of Class 1A entered the USJ building in their hero costumes, they were astounded by the massive disaster scenarios that surrounded them. This shit would have delighted Izuku. Bakugo's expression was one of despair. Ochako hadn't really been attracted to Bakugo. He was a bit too dramatic, but the way he looked at her when he was in pain made her want to know why and, if nothing else, comfort him. As a result, she let him protect her, not because she needed it, but because it seemed to make him happy. As 13 described the power of her quirk, she glanced over at Bakugo and saw the same agonized look on his face. Then, as he looked out onto the field and saw a portal open, Aizawa jerked to attention. Before Aizawa interrupted, Kirishima remarked, "Is the simulation already starting? I thought this was rescue practi." Aizawa wore his goggles and yelled, "Stay back! These are real villains." Aizawa jumped down the stairs and started fighting with the villains below, saying, 13 protect the students. Kaminari tried to get a signal out to the main building. Sweat trickled down Kaminari's face as he yelled, "Shit! I can't get through something or someone is jamming my signal." When Kurogiri appeared in front of the students obstructing the doorway, 13 interrupted, saying, "Get to the door now, students all." Kirishima and Bakugo, 2 students, rushed at Kurogiri as he was saying, "Do nothing 13. Unless you want to endanger your students with that black hole of yours." This prevented 13 from using her quirk. Kurogiri remembered what Bane had told him as he glanced at Bakugo. Kurogiri had been wondering why Bane would ask such a question. "Kurogiri, I don't care where you put me, but if you see a blonde kid with red eyes and explosions coming from his hands, send him to me." Kurogiri had inquired, "Do you mind if I ask why?" Bane merely said, glancing at him. Before escorting the other students to other parts of the USJ, he followed Bane's instructions and sent Bakugo and the redhead to him. "We have history, and nothing more." Bane and several dozen other villains sat on a big cinder block in what he assumed was a partially demolished office building. Izuku glanced up at the villain speaking to him through the one-sided lenses of his mask and asked, "So you're Bane?" He was wearing his redesigned outfit. He was dressed in Kevlar-woven pants, a long-sleeved shirt with bracers on his forearms, and upgraded steel knuckle gloves with steel-reinforced knee pads and steel toe boots. The most improved had been his mask. It had a metal breathing mask and was made of Kevlar, just like his shirt and pants, but the design was different. He was less likely to become blind because the lenses were now composed of bulletproof glass. He had claimed to Fat Cat that his peculiarity was related to breathing, but in reality, he had required the breather in order to administer the new aerosol form of venom. Bane repositioned himself on the block and answered, "I am." He hadn't taken a dose yet because he didn't want to waste one of the three by taking it too soon. "Give it to me straight, Bane. You're the real leader of this whole league of villains, aren't ya? There's no way the hand dude is the boss. He looks like some drug addict. You're the only reason a lot of us came. Man, what you did to Death Arms, that shit was epic." The antagonist chuckled as a hole appeared into the ceiling. The other villains were gathered around the portal when Bane stood up and said, "Showtime." Two children were dropped into the center of the circle like chum into a shark pool. As explosions and crashes erupted, Izuku moved slowly to the staircase leading to the next floor. "Hopefully those idiots will take out the other kid. I want Katsuki for myself, and there's no way Katsuki would get taken out by that cannon fodder. All I have to do is wait and then make my move." Bakugo and Kirishima unleashed their fury on the villains, with Kirishima striking them like a battering ram and knocking them around like rag dolls, while Bakugo continued to blow up any that were in his path until they were all unconscious on the ground. After releasing his hardening, Kirishima stated, "We need to get back to our classmates, Bakugo." Bakugo pinned a camouflaged villain to the ground with his hand before blowing him up, leaving him unconscious and smoking but alive. Before a hand shot up from the floor and grabbed hold of Bakugo's foot, pulling him through the floor and into the second level, where he faced Bane, he said, "Yeah, you're right, let's go save our classmates." Although the mask was more sophisticated, Bane's pattern could be recognized. Bakugo felt the hold on his foot loosen and let out a blast point blank, creating a huge cloud of smoke. He watched in horror as a fist blasted out of the smoke and punched him in the stomach, causing him to throw up as he flew back, slamming into a wall, gasping for air. When Kirishima saw what was happening, he jumped through the hole to assist his friend and followed right away. He watched as Bakugo set off an explosion, was hurled from the smoke that followed, and crashed into a wall. He was so preoccupied with his friend that he was unaware of the fist until it was almost too late. He hardened his arm to deflect the blow, but he was horrified to feel his skin crack and blood splatter as he was punched into the ground, barely conscious. Because Bakugo was too weak to warn Kirishima, he had just sat there and watched his friend suffer. Bakugo exploded himself at Bane and threw a stun grenade directly in front of the villain before seizing Kirishima. "Don't you hurt my friend," he yelled. When he threw Kirishima out the building window, he yelled, "You have to get out of here and go help our class." Kirishima exploded like the ball at his quirk assessment test. Bakugo turned to face Bane and asked, "You called that boy your friend?" He was fine except for the fact that his entire body was singed. With tiny explosions, Katsuki yelled, "Yeah, he's my friend, you dumbass villain. What, are you deaf? You don't have friends, Katsuki Bakugo. You only have victims and sycophants. You know, I hoped you'd be here, but at the same time I kind of hoped you weren't, because if you weren't then maybe I'd have more respect for this school, but knowing you're here means that I was right. All anyone cares about is power." Bakugo growled at the man who seemed to speak like he knew him. Bakugo yelled, "You're just some asshole villain, so don't act like you know me." As he bounded toward Bane and prepared to deliver a powerful right hook, he would destroy that mask. Bane grabbed his gauntlet just as Katsuki swung. Then he twisted on his foot and slammed Bakugo to the ground, the floor cracking beneath the impact as the air was knocked out of him again. However, Bane had not released Bakugo and had raised him up to drive his fist into the side of Katsuki's face, releasing it as he watched Katsuki fall to the ground. Bane approached Katsuki as he attempted to stand up, saying, "You always start a fight with a big right hook, Katsuki." He had blood running down the side of his face and splattering on the ground. Katsuki's head shot up as he looked at Bane, saying, "This is pathetic. Really, you're nothing to be afraid of. I can't believe Izuku was afraid of you." Katsuki stumbled to his feet and yelled, "What do you know about Izuku Midoriya?" Beneath his mask, Bane was a little shocked. It seemed as though Katsuki was worried about him because he hadn't addressed him by name since he acquired his quirk and didn't say it with the same annoyance as when he said Deku. Bane answered, I killed him months ago. In a sense, that was accurate. Since Bane was unable to coexist with Izuku Midoriya, Bane had effectively killed him. When Katsuki heard those words, his entire body went numb. The monster in front of him killed his friend, the only real friend he had ever had. The blonde glared at Bane, tears streaming from his eyes. Bane grinned. There's the Katsuki I know, full of anger and rage. It would have been a shame to come all this way to find out you changed from the monster you've always been. Katsuki pulled back the handle of one of his gauntlets, revealing a pin trigger. When he pulled it, a huge wave of explosives blew out the side of the building. You want a monster? Well, here you go, you bastard, Katsuki said. Although Katsuki was aware that he might have just killed someone, nothing mattered. He would never be forgiven by Izuku. Bane jumped up towards him from the floor below, grabbed his face, slammed Bakugo's head into the ceiling, and threw him back to the floor as his arm dropped and the floor broke beneath him. Bane slammed his foot down on Katsuki's gauntlet, smashing it and sending shards into his arms. That was close. If I hadn't punched through the floor, that would have blown me out of the building. Despite this, the explosion user moved his other gauntlet and repeated the release process with his teeth at point-blank range. Bane yelled, always on the offensive, "Fine, then let's see whose power is better," as he gave Katsuki's building explosion his best punch. Boom! That day, two simultaneous explosions that marked the conclusion of two devastating encounters shook USJ. Tamura Shigaraki saw another explosion as the effects of Katsuki and Bane's attacks echoed through USJ. He saw his beloved Nomu being launched through the USJ ceiling by All Might, the man they were there to kill. All Might's voice boomed across the field toward Tamura and Kurogiri. I really have gotten old. Back in the day it would have taken no more than 5 blows to take down that beast, but today it took more than 100. All Might didn't have much left, but he didn't want to put his students in any more danger, so he thought he might at least catch one of them since they appeared to be the attack's leaders. After he gets these two to back off, he should go after the other bad guys. Tamura angrily yelled, "Master lied to me. He's not weaker at all," as he started to scratch at his neck, his nails digging deeper and deeper into his flesh until he felt flesh and blood pool beneath them. All Might had removed Nomu, the priceless toy his master had entrusted to him, with a smile that seemed inconsequential. Kurogiri went to cover Tamura with his portal mist and said, "If All Might is here, we should retreat, Tamura. Reinforcements won't be far behind." Tamura thought of something and stopped scratching. "Reinforcements, hun?" he asked, grinning behind his hand. Tamura yelled, "Kurogiri, bring Bane here. I don't care where he is or what he's doing. Bring him here now," as he looked at Kurogiri closely. Kurogiri wanted to leave right away, but he knew that All Might, the symbol of peace, wouldn't let them go so easily. Despite his warps, Kurogiri wasn't faster than All Might. They needed Nomu or someone similar to him. He opened a portal to Bane's location and said, "I see your point, Tamura. I will do as you ask." However, rather than seeing the burly man enter, they saw a blonde boy emerge. This caused Tamura and Kurogiri's eyes to widen. Kurogiri had distorted one of the students to Bane. Did this child defeat Bane? As All Might's thunderous laughter reached Kurogiri and Tamura, that thought echoed in their minds. "Looks like you underestimated these students, you villains. Young Bakugo here has returned Saf." As All Might have observed the portal, it was evident that Bakugo was not moving independently. Rather, Bane, who emerged after Bakugo, was carrying him by the neck. Both of their bodies were now fully visible since they had exited the portal. Aside from some deep cuts, Bakugo's other arm was in relatively good condition. His left arm was covered in blood, and pieces of his gauntlet were embedded in his flesh. The only remnant of Bane's costume that remained on his left side was the metal bracer, which glowed a dull red from the heat it had absorbed. His arm and left side were badly burned, with the sleeve and the majority of his shirt on the left side burning. The whole place was filled with the stench of burning flesh. Glaring at the peace symbol, Bane said through his mask, "All Might, it's so good to see you." As All Might got ready to charge the villain and retrieve his student, he yelled, "You monster, release my student at once." He was wounded in that fight with Nomu, and without Todoroki's assistance, he would never have been able to break free from the tag team of Kurogiri and Nomu, who had managed to reopen his wound from 5 years prior. It's true that he wasn't as strong as he once was, but he still had one for all within himself and the power of his predecessors. Bane snarled as he held Bakugo in front of him, asking, "Careful, All Might, are you sure you can reach me before I snap his neck?" All Might bit his lip to acknowledge the villain had a point when he said, "It wouldn't take much, and who knows, the sheer impact of you hitting me might do it." He was quick, but was he really that quick? And even if he was, Could he really risk his students' safety in that way? In addition, he still had the problem of young Todoroki, who the other two villains might target if he went for Bakugo. The best course of action would be to wait. As All Might shifted from one villain to the next in case they moved, he asked, "Why are you here, Bane?" "The first break happens right now," Bane said, lifting Bakugo above his head before lowering his body to his knee. "I'm here to break you, All Might, not just physically but mentally as well. I will break you down, and as you crumble the rest of the world will fall with you." Bane muttered, "Goodbye, Kachan." Before he could reach Bane, a portal appeared in front of All Might, who launched himself at him. Kurogiri might not normally be quick enough, but he knew exactly where the peace symbol was going, so he opened a portal in front of Bane, dropping All Might back at the bottom of the stairs with a mere second's delay. It was more than enough, though, because the sound of breaking bones echoed through USJ, followed by Katsuki Bakugo's agonized screams. Uraraka, Tsuyu, and Mineta watched everything unfold in slow motion from their vantage point on the shipwreck zone's shore, and the sound reverberated in their minds. No. All Might charged forward to slam the villain who was going to hurt his students, but Bakugo's unconscious body slammed into him instead. Despite All Might's instinctive attempt to keep the boy from jostling him and his injured back, he was left vulnerable, allowing Bane to punch him directly in the side. In addition to using his 2 remaining doses of venom, Bane's muscles swelled with unnatural strength as he threw Bakugo at All Might, slamming it all into All Might's side. Before being struck in the jaw and having his head tilt to the side, All Might felt his ribs give and blood splatter from his mouth. "I'm at my breaking point. I can't defend myself while clinging to Bakugo, but I also can't ignore him. I can only do my best to keep the boy safe and wait for assistance to come." As Bane persisted in his assault, All Might encircled Bakugo with his arms, holding him close to his chest. Hearing the hero's teeth click loudly, Bane moved in close, pressing his fist beneath All Might's chin. He grinned beneath his mask, letting out his anger. All Might tried to back away from the villain to get some space, but Bane caught him by his foolish hair and pulled him forward, slamming his forehead into All Might's. Todoroki refused to put up with the blood that splattered the ground around the two as he watched Bane repeatedly strike All Might, placing each blow to deal the greatest amount of damage. A portal appeared in front of him, almost sucking him inside, so he had to jump back before he could launch a wall of ice to defend All Might. Kurogiri increased the suction of his portal in an attempt to sway the ice kid away, saying, "This is no place for children, boy." Bane was ecstatic that he could kill All Might right now. As Bane defeated All Might as if it were insignificant, Tamura stood and gazed in wonder. He was unable to look away from the scene. Not even Nomu had defeated All Might to this extent on his own. Under the hand on his face, he grinned broadly and burst out laughing. Bane felt All Might's bones crunch beneath his knuckles as he slammed his fist into his face. He couldn't reach his wound again because of the way he was holding Bakugo, but it was better this way because he wanted to ruin the smile he had admired for so long. "I'm no longer helpless." Before launching a right hook into the hero's face, Bane kicked All Might's leg out from under him, causing him to drop to his knee. Spit and blood flew into the air, painting the ground as All Might fell onto his back, and the hero continued to hold Bakugo to his chest. "If this continues, he will kill us both because I can hardly maintain my muscular form," All Might pondered, bracing himself for the worst. Bane yelled, "That's where you belong." All Might kneel in the face of true power, before punching the pro in the face and sending him to his back. "I apologize for not being able to protect you, young Bakugo." As All Might gazed at the unconscious boy in his arms, tears welled up in his eyes. Bane lifted his boot and stood over All Might. "Goodbye, symbol of peace." Bullets pierced Bane's skin, although not deeply, as he was about to end the age of All Might. Bane staggered back and turned to face the doorway of USJ, where several heroes were waiting. Kurogiri also had to back off as he saw the pro-hero snipe blast through Tamura's arms and legs. Bane snarled as he peered down at All Might, determined to eliminate him at all costs, before he was engulfed in Kurogiri's portal and dropped back into the bar, narrowly escaping 13's black hole's suction. Bane approached Kurogiri, snatching his neck armor and applying pressure. Bane cried out, "I had him." "You had no right," as Kurogiri's armor crumpled. Kurogiri wheezed before Bane released him and removed his mask, saying, "Tamura was injured and the pro-heroes had arrived. Our chances of victory were no longer guaranteed. It was best to retreat." The boy was sweating profusely, and his eyes and neck veins were both glowing a gentle green. Bane inhaled deeply and exhaled gradually to allow the adrenaline to subside. As a portal opened, A doctor with a thick mustache looked down at the injured Tamura, who was bleeding out onto the floor, and said, "You're right." This was his way of apologizing. "You were wrong, Master. All Might wasn't any weaker. He destroyed my Nomu. He would have gotten me if it weren't for Bane." Tamura whimpered as the physician examined his injuries. Bane removed the bullets himself without waiting for the doctor, assuming they had gone more than an inch or so. As he listened to the League's mysterious boss, Bane retrieved his bag, undressed from his ruined costume, and pulled out his civilian clothes to get dressed. Gazing at the bar through his camera at the young man dressed in the background, the boss asked, "Are you sure, Tamura? You say he defeated the Nomu, but was stopped by Bane? This boy eluded capture by fighting All Might? All for one, I thought." Suddenly, a black liquid poured from Bane's mouth, completely encasing him and taking him to a covert laboratory. "That deserves a reward, I think." Bane got up and glared at the man who had brought him here while coughing. With IVs extending from different parts of his body and scar tissue covering the upper portion of his skull, the man's mouth was his only facial feature. "Sorry for the rough departure, but I thought it would be good for us to meet face to face. I am All for One." In his actual form, All Might was lying in one of the hospital beds with the majority of his body covered in bandages. He was still quite hurt, but his injuries weren't the main source of his mental anguish, even though the recovery girl had tried her hardest. He heard the sound of Bakugo being broken over the villain's knee, and that was all he saw. He balled his fist in guilt and anger. His skeletal face was wet with tears as he exclaimed, "I'm no hero, I'm nothing." Principal Nezu said, "It's not your fault, All Might, you did your best. After all, you did manage to save Aizawa from that Nomu creature. No one could have predicted that Bane would be there." Apart from Katsuki Bakugo, the other students are unharmed. Only Kirishima received any moderate wounds. All the criminals besides Bane, the Masked Man, and the Warp Gate were all collected by the police. I'm even told that the creature known as Nomu was recovered in the nearby forest. It may not be much, but you did well today, All Might. Take comfort in the little victories. All Might sat up and turned to face the principal, his blue eyes gleaming in the corners of his sockets. "They were my students, sir. I should have been there from the beginning, but instead I wasted all my time knocking out common criminals on my way to work, and now young Bakugo is in a hospital bed fighting for his life, and I didn't want to believe that I would have to stop being the symbol of peace." Nezu nodded and let out a sigh, saying, "It's time I go through with the reason I came here, sir." He got out of the chair and went to the nurse's desk to use the PA, saying, "I knew you would say that, and I know there's no changing your mind, so I won't try. System." Before an announcement echoed throughout the school, Mirio Tagata was in the middle of class, hardly controlling his excitement for the topic at hand. Mirio jumped up from his desk and asked, "Will Mirio Tagata report to the nurse's office?" As his classmates watched in interest, Mirio exclaimed, "Yes, I will," and walked out of his classroom. Every news channel carried the same story that evening, the USJ incident. A man with a red scarf flowing from his neck and a variety of blades scattered across his body stood on a rooftop across from an electronics store. He watched with interest as his partner, a man with burned scars patching his exposed skin, listened grudgingly. Bane has reappeared in a more gory manner after a month of inactivity. He attacked Uwa with a group of criminals posing as the League of Villains in an attempt to murder All Might, a recent hire. A picture of Bane appeared on the screen, and the man in the blades grinned. The hero killer got up and stabbed the group of TVs, saying, "You fought him and know how worthy he is. You understand what is wrong with this world. We are the same Bane comrades in the war to right this world of false heroes and media whores." A nude woman was curled in the corner of a rundown hotel room, clutching her clothing to her chest while sobbing quietly and nursing a broken arm. A blonde man wearing boxers lay on the bed and watched the screen while drinking a beer. "The only reason you're still breathing is because you were a good lay, but if you keep up with that damn crying, I'll have to change my mind," he said. "We're told they failed in that aspect, but did severely wound a student before leaving. We're not sure of the severity of the student's injury, nor was the student's name released to us, but our thoughts and prayers go out to them and their family. We still don't know what Bane is after. Is he simply here to cause trouble, or do his motivations go deeper?" The blonde man jumped to his feet and laughed wildly, revealing his prosthetic eye and the scar on the left side of his face as he sat up. The man picked up his clothes, putting on a pair of jeans and a burgundy muscle shirt before putting on his boots. "It doesn't matter what he's after. All that matters is that he's doing what he wants and nobody can stop him. That's fucking great. He's the kind of guy the First can work with," he said. He took a handful of cash out of his pocket and tossed it in her direction after turning to face the woman who was still cowering silently in the corner. Before he opened the door and walked out, he said, "Buy yourself something nice, sweetheart." A blonde girl with two disheveled buns on the side of her head, wearing an oversized sweater that covered most of her navy blue skirt, skipped away from the businessman's body in a back alley while licking the blood off her knife like it was a gourmet lollipop. She had her earbuds on and was listening to the news. Still, the fact remains, a villain of this magnitude has not been seen for some time, and whatever his motive, it is clear Bane is not done. In fact, he might just be getting started. The blonde girl smiled widely, revealing large canines as her amber eyes glowed gleefully in the dark as she looked at a picture of her crush Bane covered in the blood of death arms. "Oh Bane, what's a girl to do?" As she skipped into the night, she said, putting the photo in her sweater. The doors at Dagoba Hospital flew open as a blonde woman hurried in and slammed her hands down on the desk while her husband did his best to follow her. "Where is Katsuki Bakugo and what room is he in?" His mother, Mitsuki Bakugo, wore a black t-shirt, jeans, and heels. Her husband, Masaru Bakugo, was standing behind her, stooped over, and panting heavily. He wore a tan t-shirt, slacks, and gray running shoes. "He's in the operating room right now. You can't see him just yet, he's still in surgery," the woman behind the counter said, glancing at the anxious mother and father before quickly searching up the information. Mitsuki slammed her palm on the counter and said, "Listen, that's my son in there, tell me everything. Please have a seat. We'll let you know when he's out of surgery." When UA teacher Midnight heard the commotion, she came over to the couple and yelled, shaking off her husband's attempts to soothe her. "Pardon me, but I teach at UA." Mitsuki gave the receptionist a glare and then walked away with Midnight, saying, "I can try to fill you in on what happened, but it won't be much because I wasn't actually there and the teachers who are too injured to speak right now." Masaru sighed with relief and then bowed in apology as he left to hear what had happened to his son. Midnight told the couple what she had learned about the attack, even relaying what Bane had done to their son. Mitsuki covered her mouth as tears fell from her eyes as she felt her husband try to comfort her by grabbing her shoulders. As she stood there with the grieving couple, the clicking of Recovery Girl's cane could be heard. Mitsuki had always prided herself on being a strong woman, but now she was a mother worried about her son, so she turned into her husband's embrace and cried against his chest. Midnight looked down in shame, because they were supposed to protect these students, and within a week they had had a break-in by the media, which turned out to have been done by the villains to get confidential information, and now one of their students might have been crippled for life. The Recovery Girl's bun was a little sloppy, and even behind her visor, they could see that the hero was worn out. "How is Bakugo, Recovery Girl?" In an attempt to alleviate some of her exhaustion, Recovery Girl removed her visor and pinched the bridge of her nose before Midnight called for the parents, who were still gathering themselves. Mitsuki and Masaru both grinned when they heard that their boy would recover from this, but Midnight could tell there was more because of the way Recovery Girl was holding onto her cane. "But there was some damage that even I couldn't fix. He's out of surgery and his spine is intact, so there's no worry of him being paralyzed at least. You have to realize that he had broken vertebrae in multiple places, exposing raw nerves, which were made worse by the movement he endured while under protection. As you may be aware, the spinal cord facilitates communication between the brain and the rest of the body by acting as a highway for the nervous system. You can use these cues to move your arm, curl your toes, or even activate your quirk." The implied meaning of Recovery Girl's words sent a chill down both Bakugo's spines. "You don't mean? Katsuki's perspiration is naturally explosive, so how is that possible?" In the hopes that the hero might be mistaken, Mitsuki asked. The Recovery Girl took her visor off and sat down in the closest chair to give an explanation. The two parents nodded when the Recovery Girl said, "It's true Katsuki can still sweat, but it's a conscious decision for Katsuki to explode his sweat. It doesn't happen automatically, correct? The neural pathways that send that particular impulse to induce the explosions are damaged. We don't know if that's permanent or not, but at this moment Katsuki can no longer activate his quirk. For all intents and purposes Katsuki Bakugo is quirkless." Mitsuki collapsed to her knees, dragging her husband as she did so. "Quirkless? Is this what Inko's been feeling all this time?" Mitsuki asked as her husband held her to his chest. Glaring at the man before him, Bane stood up and wiped his mouth of saliva. He looked around the dimly lit room and asked, "All for One was it?" The numerous screens in front of All for One, one of which was a feed from the bar he had just left, were the only source of light. The situation was not good. In addition to being in a strange place with a man he barely knew, Bane's venom would eventually run out, leaving him vulnerable. Bane's green eyes flashed in surprise and then rage as they bore into the spot where All for One's eyes used to be. "There's no reason to be so wary, Izuku Midoriya. I simply wished to speak to you." All for One just grinned. He turned his chair to face Izuku and said, "No need for such a look, my friend. After all, what kind of a teacher would I be if I didn't know who my precious student was consorting with?" Feeling like a caged animal, Bane asked, "What do you want?" The man in front of him had upset him by doing something that hadn't happened in months. "Believe me when I say that I have no intention of revealing your identity to anyone. After all, it's not like I can go into a police station looking like this now, can I?" He laughed. Bane clenched his teeth, but he was out of time as green steam erupted from his body, causing him to shrink slightly and stumble a little. "No, if anything, I am enamored with you. You are a quirkless boy who have cultivated a strength all your own that allows you to stand toe to toe with the best." Before speaking, All for One silently observed the spectacle. "A time limit, interesting," he said, then raised his right hand, causing the fingers to grow black with red lines before stretching out and becoming embedded in Izuku's chest. Bane felt as though electricity was coursing through him as the fingers pierced his skin, but he was unable to react because his muscles were exhausted. Before he felt the fingers leave him and fell to his knees, he grunted in agony. After the pain subsided, he immediately became aware of itching, particularly in his arm, on the left side of his body. He examined it and saw the freshly knitted skin appear as though it had never been damaged as the burned flesh fell away. His left side and deeper were covered in this sight. He still experienced the crash of having so much venom in his system, but it was lessened. He got back up and turned to face All for One. He inquired, "What did you do?" All for One grinned again. "I simply righted the wrong that fate gave you. You are quirkless no more. I have given you one of my many quirks. It's called Regenerate. Any wound will be healed in moments as long as you have the energy necessary to facilitate it. This is my gift to you for keeping Tamura safe when I could not." Bane observed that the healing had no longer completely healed him. He felt a little sore when he flexed his arms, but nothing more. He looked at everyone and said, "You have a quirk that gives quirks?" One person shook his head. "That is only half of it. My quirk, like my name, is All for One. I can take quirks from anyone and then give them to others or keep them to myself. I have in my possession over 100 years worth of quirks." Bane's gaze widened. It was impossible for him to have such a crazy power and for no one to be aware of it. Everyone laughed. Bane looked at him as he calmed down and decided to accept what he was told for the time being. "I see why you wear a mask. Your emotions are far too easy to read, but it's true I have lived over 100 years thanks to a combination of longevity and healing quirks. But in all my years I have never encountered someone like you. A keen and dexterous mind far beyond your years. There's that mental dexterity I spoke of. Now I'm sure you have questions, so let me begin at the beginning. When quirks were still new rare instances among the populace, I took action. After all, these people had no leader, they had no support against the growing hatred and jealousy of the normal people. I became their symbol to show them that they need not be afraid as long as they stuck together behind me." Bane nodded. He could see the reasoning behind it. In a turbulent period of society, people with peculiarities would undoubtedly follow anyone who offered protection. "I had a younger brother who at the time I thought was like you. Quirkless. He was sickly and weak, so I wanted to protect him. I gave him a quirk, nothing flashy, just the ability to store power, but he didn't agree with my methods and turned against him, and unknown to both of us, my brother did have a quirk. The ability to pass on his power, combined that with the ability I gave him, and you get what his successors call one for all." Bane observed that All for One was frowning more and more deeply as he talked. "He passed that power on without my noticing, and so began the line of heroes my brother created to bring me down. This power has passed down through 8 people. I killed the last person to have it and nearly did so with its current holder, All Might, but instead we were both dealt grievous injuries and forced to retreat." Bane gave All for One a look. Before grinning and giggling, he said, "You're telling me that All Might's enormous strength is a hand-me-down from you? We truly are opposites, aren't we? He was just given power. That's what I hate about all the people with quirks. They were just lucky to get the powers they have, and they looked down on me because I wasn't. And All Might is the perfect example of being lucky. That's all that separated me from everyone else." Bane breathed out and then opened them once more. Even though one couldn't see Bane directly, he could sense the fire in this man's eyes. "That's good, because now I've earned my power and I'll show them that luck can't save them." Bane scowled as he glanced at All for One. "And that's the other reason I called you here. This drug that affords you so much power, what is it?" Although Bane didn't trust him because he had given him a quirk to protect his pet project, he would still give him something because he already knew about his venom and didn't need him to keep that burden on him. "It's called Venom. It's a super steroid I developed. It increases my strength several times over with each dose. I didn't have a quirk, so my physical strength and mind is all I had. Plus people always underestimate strength quirks thinking they're all idiots who just know how to throw a punch. All for One grinned. Bane interrupted All for One as he noticed a screen with multiple figures in huge chemical vats. I agree strength quirks are simple, but in the right hands are truly effective. The reason I ask is because. Knowing that he was correct, he said, you want to use it on your Nomu, correct? He looked at All for One, who nodded in agreement. Venom is a delicate cocktail of multiple drugs, it'll affect them, but I'm not sure how considering they do have quirks, multiple ones each, I'm assuming. Tell me All for One, what do you want, and why use Tamura? All for One returned to his wall screen and focused on the image of the bar and Tamura receiving medical attention. Tamura is my goal. I want him to be the new me. I know at the moment he's not much. Nothing more than a child who enjoys breaking things, but that's why he needs you. True evil has ambitions, goals to accomplish, anything else is just petty crime. I'm hoping by associating with you he'll understand that and grow. I know giving us the key to your strength is not something you're inclined to do, but I assure you it is mutually beneficial. Make your strength our strength. The Nomu are blank slates, you can experiment on them as much as you like, and even if the drug fails on them they'll still be useful and you will be able to push your venom to its utmost limit. Now tell me Bane, what is your goal? The scarred man said, turning around once more to face Bane. I want to bring this city to its knees before me, and for the time being siding with you guys seem to be the right thing to do. I'll give you my venom, but only I will work with it, so if you want my venom give me a lab and some of your Nomu. All for One grinned and nodded. He raised his hand and teleported Bane back to the bar, saying, I'll have it taken care of and let you know when it's done. Here's to a continued partnership. Tamura had been looking at the location where Bane had gone. Before the doctor informed him that the master wished to talk to Bane, he was nervous. The fact that the master no longer spoke to him directly made Tamura uncomfortable, but Bane was able to meet him after just one mission. Before the doctor slapped his hand, Tamura reached for the bandages covering his arm, hoping to scratch the wounds. Observing Tamura's dirty and cracked fingernails, he said, don't scratch them, you might infect them. Tamura snarled and glared at the doctor, considering tearing his foolish mustache off his face, but Bane reappeared in the bar before he could do so. He was smaller than before he left, but he appeared fully recovered and uninjured. Bane grabbed his bag and made his way to the door. Tamura stood up, hissing a little as the bullet holes in his legs throbbed, and asked, wait, what did Master say? Bane wanted nothing more than to get out. Whether he was tired or not, his body needed to rest. However, he turned around after recalling All for One's words. He put his ruined costume in the bag he carried as he left the bar, saying, he gave me a reason to stay here, and now I'm going to gather my strength and you should do the same. To put it into words you'll understand. We cleared level 1, so we need to assemble a new party because level 2 is going to be that much harder. Tamura nodded as he sat down and glanced at the door. As the doctor was twisted out by Kurogiri, who removed his damaged neck armor after noticing Bane's hand imprint in the metal and realizing how close he had come to getting hurt, he said, yeah, level 2. With a slight smile on his face, Bane headed home, his thoughts focused on preparation. You made a mistake, and I don't intend to be your go-to guy. In this city, there can only be one top dog, and that will be me. For the time being, I'll play your game, but when the time comes, I'll overthrow you and claim the title for myself. He thought as he entered his room, unlocked the door, put his bag in the closet next to it, picked up his laptop, and climbed into bed. He needed an inner circle of his own people who were devoted to him and him alone if he was going to defeat All for One. After searching through dozens of resumes, Bane found a few that caught his attention on the most wanted list of Japan. He then proceeded to the city's active crimes and discovered an intriguing one concerning a string of corpses that were entirely bloodless. Since it was always beneficial to be aware of what the police knew and didn't know, he had taken the time to learn about hacking. Bane turned off his computer and immediately fell into a deep sleep, saying, looks like I'll have my work cut out for me, but for now I need sleep. Classes were cancelled the following day at UA, and the staff, aside from All Might, who had personal matters to attend to, locked themselves in the conference room to discuss what had happened. This is absurd. The semester hasn't even begun yet, and this is happening. One of our students is seriously hurt, not to mention what happened to Eraserhead and 13, exclaimed Present Mike, feeling sorry for his friend. Something needs to be done. Upping the security isn't going to solve everything. I think we should cancel the sports festival, and focus solely on improving the students' abilities. They were lucky this time, but we can't depend on that again. Snipe was leaning forward on the table. There was a mutter of agreement in the room as Midnight said, that's just going to show weakness to the public. The sports festival is the cornerstone of UA the whole world looks forward to, and it links directly to where and how our students get their internships. We can't just take that from them. The entire room turned to watch Principal Nezu cough. I agree with Snipe, the sports festival is not our priority at this moment, but it will be held. I suggest we do things out of order. Normally we do the sports festival, send the students on their internships and then have the training camp over the summer. I'm going to rearrange that. We will hold the sports festival ahead of schedule, getting it out of the way as quickly as possible before the villains can mount another attack. If that was their goal, then the students can participate in their internships afterwards. We can get a jump start on the training camp. Until final exams are over, we will push our students more than before, and then once the exams have been completed, we will send them to the training camp where their intense training will continue. This will give us even more time to groom our students and prepare them for the next attack. Can everyone agree to this? Nezu stated as the teachers nodded, glad the principal could come up with a compromise. All Might occupied a top-floor office in a 5-story structure. The structure was called Night Eye Hero Agency. His old sidekick Night Eye, a tall, slender man with green hair with blonde streaks and glasses wearing a spotless green suit, was seated at the desk. The tall, blonde young man in front of All Might, who was sitting on a couch at the coffee table, said, "And that's the story of one for all and all for one." All Might leaned back against the couch, his skeletal body barely visible through the cushions. All Might looked into Mirio's eyes and said, "I know it's a lot to take in, young Mirio, but knowing this, will you accept my power?" Mirio stood up and gave the OK sign without missing a beat. Toshinori nodded and grinned, replying, "But of course I will, All Might, that's what a hero does, accepts burdens too heavy for any one man." All Might stood up, his pinstriped yellow suit hanging off him like a coat rack, and looked at his old sidekick. Not a second of hesitation. "Very well then, if it's alright with you Night Eye, I'll be taking your pupil under my wing for a bit." Night Eye gave a contemptuous wave. Looking at Mirio, Night Eye said, "There's no problem, I'm just glad you've realized your mistake before it was too late, All Might. I've mentored him to be your ultimate successor, there's no worry in entrusting him with your power." Mirio grinned broadly at his mentor's compliment. "Thank you, sir." Since Bane had received 3 doses of venom in a short period of time, it was not surprising that he woke up later than usual. Consequences were inevitable. Stretching, he got out of bed and undressed before taking a shower and getting ready for the day. He had to locate the first recruit on his list, and he knew exactly where to begin. As he dried off after taking a shower, he opened his laptop and displayed a list of recent crimes, most of which involved victims who had been beaten to death, leaving only a bloody pulp in their wake. As he dressed, he looked over the reports and said, "If what I read is any indication, then he shouldn't be that hard to track, especially if he's close." Bane went into the kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast, but he needed to consume a lot of calories to make up for what Venom had consumed. He piled a plate high with toast, bacon, and eggs, then quickly finished it off with a glass of milk. As he rummaged through his phone, he discovered an email with an address that was undoubtedly from All for One. As he left, he placed the dishes in the sink and packed some of his chemicals in a backpack. He headed there after spotting it on the map. The building in Camino Ward was unremarkable. For about an hour, he observed the area from a corner, noting the foot traffic, which he found to be very little. "At least I'm not concerned about getting noticed." Before approaching the building and hopping the stone wall, he pondered. Finding a key beneath a nearby rock, Bane stalked up to the door and opened it. He discovered 4 chemical vats filled with Nomu and all the lab supplies he would ever require. Bane searched the room and discovered what he believed to be a number of bugs and tiny cameras. Well, this will definitely speed things along, but first. Before starting his experiments, he smashed the tiny electronics and said, "Sorry, no peeking." In order to make his venom work on any Nomu regardless of the quirk set, Bane spent the following few weeks experimenting on the Nomu. Since venom was derived from a drug intended to enhance quirks, it was relatively easy to use on the Nomu. However, the challenge was that each Nomu had multiple quirks, each distinct from the others. After all, venom was a designer drug that he had created for himself, someone who had no quirk. Making venom a universally applicable medication for the Nomu was extremely challenging, but it was also immensely satisfying. By incorporating the findings into his own venom, he was able to use it far more effectively than he could have if he had been testing it on normal people. He had also begun to learn about his regeneration quirk during this period. He discovered that, depending on their severity, broken bones took minutes to heal while flesh wounds healed in a matter of seconds. After testing his blood after being exposed to arsenic and similar substances, he even appeared to be immune to poisons. However, The biggest advantage was that his intake of venom had increased. Now, he could take 3 doses of venom with little difficulty. Speaking of venom intake, he had created tubes to inject venom directly into the Nomu's brains because they were like sponges and could withstand a steady supply of it without going insane because their minds were essentially dead. They would be able to take and deal damage in absurd amounts because they would be constantly on a venom rush. As he looked at them, he said, "My perfect soldiers." Providing All for One and his doctor with just enough information was a pain, but it appeared to be working. He had begun giving his blanket venom to All for One, but he wouldn't part with the 4 he had, claiming he could accomplish more with subjects who had already been exposed to venom. They were prepared to comply with his request because of the quantity of venom they were receiving. He would be the only one in charge of these 4. The venom he was giving All for One was nothing in comparison to what he could now make for himself, and they would receive the more specialized dosage to specifically enhance the quirks they possessed. In the beginning, he felt more comfortable testing his venom on these stupid creatures. He had marketed his prototype venom as a makeshift trigger, and although their weakness made it possible for him to use them as test subjects, it still made him sick to see people go insane and perish. Bane put his chemicals away in a little hole he had dug out behind the vats after spending hours mixing them. He also made sure to bring his notebooks with him, which contained the knowledge he had gained that day. It was the ideal time to go talk to his unaware informant because it was getting close to sunset. Bane took a train to a nearby city, disembarked well after dark, and traveled to the city's red light district. After a run-in with his first recruit, he had finally located the girl who had gone to ground quite firmly, probably out of fear for her life after learning what the man she had snitched on was capable of. At one point, the thought of this place would have made him blush, but now that he could pass through without being bothered by the women's lustful gaze, he chose to take advantage of the situation and went up to one. With 6 arms, red skin, and a big horn sticking out of her forehead, she was a heteromorphic type. She smiled at him and spread her hands over him, saying, "Oh my, you're a big one, aren't you?" He cleared his throat. In the hopes that she would be helpful, he said, "I'm looking for someone." She gave him a big smile that showed off all of her shark-like teeth. She put a leg around his and said, "Me too, darling, so why don't we just get down to it?" With a sigh, he held up a photo of the girl he was trying to find. The girl stepped back and looked at him right away, asking, "Where is she? I know this is her usual area." As she left, Bane grinned and said, "If you're not here for me, I can't help you." He had hoped she would give up quickly and stop lying to him. After a few minutes of waiting, he started to follow her, and she eventually took him to the exact location he needed. She went upstairs to an apartment building and knocked on a door. The red girl he was looking for opened the door and let her in. He threw his backpack onto one of the roofs above him to be retrieved later and sat down on the ground in the alleyway's shadow, saying, "Now to wait." Bane started to feel that he needed to get rid of All for One, but he wasn't stupid enough to think that he could kill someone who had already lived for more than a century and had sparred with All Might before he was so easily wounded. No, a direct assault would only result in his death. A more subdued approach was needed. Bane saw someone else observing the tiny apartment while he was making plans. He decided to wait a little while longer to see what would happen, even though based on the person's size, it was likely that this was the person he was looking for. Shortly after the mystery man approached the door, grabbed the doorknob, forced the door open, and entered, the red-skinned prostitute quickly left after hugging her friend. After crossing the street to make sure no one had noticed the forced entry, Bane walked up to the apartment and entered. Aware of the type of man he would be facing, Bane reached for one of his new patches, a green V-shaped sticker. He removed it from its backing and slapped it onto his chest, feeling the patch melt against his skin as his freshly redesigned venom filled him. His current patch was equal to 3 doses of his previous serum. His height and bulk were greatly increased by the bulging muscles beneath his skin. He exhaled deeply and turned the corner, where a burly blonde man was clutching the prostitute he had been looking for by the neck against the wall. His fist tightened, and the woman wheezed as her throat was forced shut. Mary, why'd you have to go and do something stupid like rat me out to the cops?" he asked. As he brought his hand towards him, he slammed it in the back of her head against the wall, watching blood splash against the surface. He then let go, dropping the limp form to the ground. "I was really going to let you live. Now I've got to come back here instead of getting on with finding my new partner," he growled. Bane clapped behind the big male out of his line of sight. The man known as Muscular turned around and grinned, saying, "A little drawn out, but glad you finished it. I don't want her blabbing about what we're going to discuss, Muscular." The apartment shook as Muscular yelled, "Looks like it's a 2 for 1 tonight," and rushed towards Bane at a breakneck pace. rearing back as muscle fibers tore from his skin, coiling around his arm as it propelled his fist forward, only to be caught by Bane's hand. Bane grinned. He pulled Muscular forward into a headbutt, smashing the killer's nose as he released him, and then drove a fist into his stomach, saying, "I figured this would happen. Thank you for the chance to test out my new venom." Muscular staggered back, gripping his stomach and nose while he gazed at the man in front of him. He had never been so easily overpowered by anyone. Muscular snarled as muscle fibers shot out of his trousers, propelling him forward. He clasped Bane's hand and shoved him back, pushing him through a wall into another apartment while he heard the residents' cries as the two fell to the ground. Bane grabbed Muscular's arm and twisted in midair to put the criminal under him and drove him into the ground, placing his boot on Muscular's neck as he stared down at him. Muscular looked down at the man beneath him as he pulled back his fist to throw a punch, only to be punched in the shoulder, throwing off his blow as it crashed into the floor, causing it to give way as the two titans fell through. Muscular scowled at the man above him and attempted to pry his arm free, but Bane's hold remained firm no matter how much effort he put behind it. It was impossible for Muscular to have lost its brute strength. He yelled, "Who the hell are you?" Bane grinned as he stepped away from him and released his arm. Bane offered the murderer his hand and said, "I'm Bane and I want you to join me, Muscular. Come with me and rampage to your heart's content." For a moment, Muscular lay there gazing up at the man in front of him. The expression in his eyes made his body tingle. In the distance, Muscular heard police sirens and laughed. As the breaker pulled Bane to his feet, he grabbed his hand. As Bane firmly clasped his hand in agreement, he said, "To my heart's content? I knew you were the only guy the first could work with. Let's fuck shit up, boss." Before the police turned the corner of the street, he said, "We should leave. I'm not ready to engage the heroes yet. I have more recruits to find." He ducked out of the empty apartment and then used his newfound strength to launch himself to the next rooftop, Muscular, right on his heels. Before continuing with Muscular, Bane paused to watch them while he got his backpack and made sure no one had noticed their escape. Since he didn't really want Muscular to live with him and because having a killer guard dog like him would prevent All For One from sending one of his pawns to spy on him, he led the murderer back to the lab with the Nomu. Muscular grinned at the idea of killing someone when he said, "If anyone but me comes here, kill them." He walked over to examine the 4 Nomu in their vats, each of which was filled with tubes that continuously pumped venom into them, and said, "Got ya, boss." Bane was about to leave when Muscular said, "What's with these ugly fucks?" He turned to go when his phone started ringing. It was Kurogiri. "They're the grunts who are going to lay the groundwork for me to take this city." "What is it?" he inquired, halting before the door. "Where's your location?" Kurogiri asked him in his ear. "We request your presence at the bar." Bane sighed, not wanting to deal with the League and Tamura at the moment. He had learned from his brief discussions with All For One's physician regarding the Nomu that Tamura was upset that people believed Bane was the League of Villains leader. As Tamura's mentor on the path to villainy, he still had to play the part that All For One wanted him to. Bane informed Kurogiri that a portal had appeared in front of him and that he was now at the lab. He heard the last part of a sentence as Bane passed through. "I came for him." Bane turned to face the man who had spoken, staring into Stain the hero killer's crimson eyes. With a sword aimed at Bane and a knife in his shoulder, he was kneeling above Tamura. Bane looked around the room at the other 2 men. A lizard man imitating Stain's attire, which included a scarf around his neck and a piece of cloth acting as his mask, and a black-haired man with a patchwork of scars across his exposed flesh. Bane glanced down at Tamura, then at Kurogiri, who was slumped against the bar, bleeding from his arm. He muttered a growl to himself. "What have you fools gotten me involved in?" As he stood over Tamura, Bane sheathed his sword and approached him, locking eyes with Stain. As he examined the child before him, Stain said, "So you're Bane." The fact that someone so young had made such significant progress toward making the world right as Stain himself was shocking. Bane looked into his eyes and saw that they were burning with an unidentified fire. "And you're the hero killer, Stain." He started to consider how he might use this man to further his own objectives. He benefited from the fact that Stain and Tamura were clearly not on the best of terms based on what he had entered. He would have a strong ally if he could win Stain over more than Tamura. Stain pointed to Tamura, who was standing up and glaring at him, and said, "These 2 brought me here and the only reason I and my apprentices came was to speak with you, but instead I was met with this demented fool." Bane felt some of that wrath directed at him as well. Bane chose to ignore that jab at Tamura, asking, "You wanted to speak with me, what about?" He didn't want to deal with that. If he gave in to that, Tamura would lose his shit. Tamura yelled, "Don't ignore me," at the pair. His fingers were flexed in preparation for an attack. "This is my league. I built it and I am its leader, not Bane. You will respect me, or I'll kill the both of you," he said. For better or worse, Bane gritted his teeth because he couldn't risk breaking the league just yet and he still needed Tamura. He's right, Tamura did build this league. Think of me as a free agent lending my time here, so I'm free to speak with you nonetheless. Bane nodded. For now, let Tamura have this league. Although Tamura straightened up after realizing that Bane understood his role in this group, he still desired to murder Stain for reopening some of his wounds and stabbing him in the same way. Stain glanced back and forth between them, then addressed Bane again. Stain threatened as the scarred man and the lizard male by the door both assumed active stances. "I don't care whether you're the leader or not, it has no bearing on my question. What is your goal? What will drive you to do what you do? Just know if I don't like your answer, you and this league will die by our hands. My goal is simple, true power. Strength surpassing any skill. The people of this world worship at a false altar of power. The number one hero is nothing more than the winner of a popularity contest, and the people view that as true power. They're all wrong. Power is terrifying, nothing can stand in the way of it, and I will wield that power to open their eyes to how frail their strength is," Bane said as he gazed into Stain's red eyes. "You are worthy. Your conviction has convinced me to help you in your endeavor to change the world, for just like you I am an agent of change. This world is stagnant because there are no true heroes anymore. All these fakes that pander to the camera make me sick, they should all be purged. There is only one man who deserves the title of hero. The man you fought at USJ. All Might." Bane now understood what the blaze in Stain's eyes meant. It was fanaticism. This man was a hero worshipper, and anyone who didn't live up to his standards of heroism, established by All Might, would perish. Working with this man would be much simpler now that he understood him. As Stain and his two students walked out of the bar, Bane remarked, "I look forward to changing the world with you, Stain." Bane let out a sigh as he observed Kurogiri, who could now stand independently. He glared at Tamura and said, "Never bring me into something like that again. I'm not one of your Nomu, Tamura. I don't mindlessly obey you. Order me around like that again and I'll break you." Tamura returned the glare. Tamura shouted, rushing at Bane with his hands out in front of him, "Everyone thinks this is your league, your plan, and it makes me sick. I want you gone." Bane grinned to himself. This would be the ideal opportunity to remove Tamura from service. He couldn't kill him, but it wouldn't hurt to keep him in bed for a while. Before All For One's voice crackled through the TV speakers, he pondered. "Tamura, stop." Tamura instantly halted, rerouting his hands like a leashed dog, just short of the portals Kurogiri had created. Tamura dropped his hands like a sulky child and stalked over to the bar, placing them fully on it. "Bane is here to help you. If not for him you would be rotting in a cell somewhere out of my reach. Even now he has granted you another ally to your cause. You should think about your actions more carefully." Bane watched as the wood started to rapidly decay, turning to dust. Bane grinned at this development. He was beginning to sour relations with his beloved pupil, and since Tamura was All For One's only genuine means of making a difference in the world, he would be cut off if that relationship ended. As he entered the portal, he said, hardly masking a smile, "Send me back Kurogiri, I have more work to do for our master." He would give Tamura time to think about it, and ideally his jealousy would lead him to act rashly now in an attempt to win back his master's favor. Muscular was dozing off in a corner of Bane's lab, which was filled with six-packs and numerous convenience store meals. It's clear that he has settled in. As Bane walked away, he thought. As he strolled through the streets, he said, "Now I need to get to work finding my next recruit." Observing that morning was drawing near, he made the decision to spend the next few days researching his next target after he went to bed. As she brushed some of her maroon hair out of her face, Kenji Hikiishi strolled through the park, enjoying the warm sunlight on her skin while she gazed at all the nice people she could kill. She was dressed in blue jeans, running shoes, an orange button-up shirt, and white-rimmed triangular sunglasses. She kept moving along the path, searching in all directions for the ideal victim, and eventually she found a green-haired boy standing at the entrance to one of the park's running trails. He wore running shorts, red running shoes, and a gray muscle shirt. His hair was styled in a crew cut. Kenji couldn't take her eyes off him as he performed a series of stretches. Beneath his flesh, she could see the corded muscle flexing. They're all tough at first. Wow, what a tough guy. As she approached to greet him, she pondered. She said, "Hello, I haven't seen you around before." The man turned to face her, allowing her to see his face. His rugged features were adorned with charming freckles and vibrant green eyes. "Yes, he is unquestionably my type." As the man looked up and down at her, she thought. In a thick country accent, he said, "Heard this park had one of the toughest trails in the city, so I had to come. Friends call me Shadonki, nice to meet ya. Care to keep me company on the trail?" He gestured thumbs up towards the path in question. "I'm new here, bro." As she watched Shadonki go off down the path, Kenji nodded excitedly. As she departed after him while observing Shadonki's sprint in front of her, Kenji remarked, "You couldn't have chosen a nicer day to die, Shadonki." The trail seemed insignificant to his strong legs. Although keeping up with Shadonki was not easy, Kenji wasn't exactly planning on finishing this trail alongside him. Kenji made the decision to approach her once they were sufficiently removed from the trail's head and there was no one else in the area. She accelerated, her legs pushing her in Shadonki's direction. Her heart was racing from the excitement she always gets when she's about to kill, not just from the effort of running. She could already picture how it would feel to slam Shadonki's body to pieces. "However, don't worry, I'll ignore your lovely face. I swear." As she threw herself at Shadonki's back, ready to punch him in the base of the spine, Kenji pondered. A huge cloud of dust erupted around the two as Shadonki planted his right foot on Kenji's right wrist and his right knee on Kenji's left forearm. Just as Kenji was about to make contact, he spun on his heel and grabbed hold of her face, smashing her glasses into her face as he slammed Kenji into the path's dirt. As Shadonki's fingers touched Kenji's face, his eyes widened in surprise. "I was wondering when you were going to make your move. It's nice to meet you, Magna." Kenji stared into those once bright green eyes, now dark with satisfaction like a lion enjoying its prey, and asked, "How do you know who I am?" Magna's eyebrows furrowed in perplexity as he said, "I said people call me Shadonki, remember? You were probably too busy imagining killing me to pay attention to my name." What was so special about Shadonki? Then Magna remembered that Shadonki translated to breaker in English, but how would that have warned her about this man? Magna's eyes widened in surprise again, realizing that this was Bane. Recently, it was revealed that Death Arms had been forced to retire because of injuries he sustained from Bane. One reporter referred to this as the great break of the hero's career. Later, it was leaked that Bane had broken a student's back. Because of the close proximity of these two incidents, many people came to refer to Bane as the Breaker. Bane released his grip on the villain when he noticed the recognition in Magna's eyes. Magna sat up, threw away her broken glasses, and looked up at Bane. "I see you've put it all together, good, that saves me an introduction. Now then, Magna, I've come to ask you to join me." She stood up and patted the dust off her butt and back, saying, "You could have just said so you didn't have to get so rough with me. I'm a tender maiden after all." Bane gave a shrug. "I had to know you were the right person. It's not like I have your number, and if I hadn't been so aggressive with you, then there was no way you'd stick around long enough for us to talk." He was staring at her. Bane repeated, "Now will you join me or not?" Setting up this encounter had required a lot of work, and he had even gone so far as to publicly expose himself in order to meet Magna, a man, or, in Magna's view, a woman, who had a long history of murder. Magna asked, crossing her arms and averting her gaze for a second, "Why should I join you?" But Bane was standing directly in front of her. Before Bane grabbed her arm and stopped her, she blushed and took a step back. "Because you want to be the best version of yourself and live how you see fit, right? That's never going to happen in the world we live in now. There's no place for one such as you, Magna. You're a killer for one, and your personal view of reality is something no one will agree with. Come with me, I have a place for you, or don't, and once this city is mine you'll regret not taking my offer," Bane said as he released her arm and turned toward her. As he walked away, he said, "This is your best chance to realize the life you want." Before speaking, Magna bit her lip and glanced down at the arm Bane had taken. Magna stepped forward and said, "I'll join you on one condition." Bane glanced over his shoulder at her. Bane raised an eyebrow and then shrugged when someone asked, "See, can I call you big bro?" He started down the path with Magna following him, saying, "Call me whatever you want, just hurry up, I intend to finish this run and get back, so come on." As Muscular gazed at his brain guys or whatever, he opened a beer and gazed into one of the boss's tubes. As he heard the door open behind him, he grinned and chugged the beer, some of it running down the side of his mouth. "I don't know what the boss has planned for you ugly fucks, but I bet it's going to be good." Muscular turned to face Bane and then noticed the other man with him. "Hey boss, I'm getting bored. When are we going to tear shit up? I'm getting bored sitting in this place day after day." Muscular approached Bane and Magna and threw the empty beer can in the corner, saying, Hey, who's this guy?" Before elaborating, Bane eyed Muscular. Muscular gritted his teeth and looked at the red-headed person next to Bane. We're going to be moving out soon, and this is Magna. She'll be lending me her power in the coming conflicts. Muscular yelled, in what world is this guy? Is she? What are you, some kind of fruit? Magna glared at him as he moved forward. Magna clenched her fists and Muscular did the same, both of them glaring at Magna. I'd watch your mouth around a lady, you muscle-bound bastard, Magna said. Bane yelled, enough, as he looked down at the two of them. Magna and Muscular shook their heads no, but Bane still stared down the two and said, you both were chosen by me, remember? If you have a problem with each other, then that means you have a problem with my choices. Is that what you're telling me? Good. From this day forward we're a team, which means we need to work together, which means we need to know one another in and out so we can work efficiently. So get ready, you two, it's training time. Bane smashed his fists together and smiled at the two. Slowly opening his eyes, Katsuki turned his head in the direction of the sound that had roused him. Even though his vision was poor, what he could see made his heart race. Izuku, a friend from his youth, was seated there. He was peeling apples while seated by his bed. Izuku? Katsuki asked, unwilling to believe, but his vision soon cleared and he saw Inko Midoriya's face. Once more, his heart sank into his stomach. This was not the first instance of it. Since she didn't have a job, Inko was frequently with him at the hospital, where she looked after him for his own parents. Inko placed the apple down beside another that had just been peeled and said, sorry dear, it's just me. Did I wake you? Katsuki coughed and reached up to wipe the sleep and the tears that had not yet fallen from his eyes. Katsuki tried to sit up, but as he did, a pain shot through his back. No you didn't, Aunt Inko. With a painful grunt, he collapsed back onto the bed. Immediately, Inko got to work. She pushed a button on the side of the hospital bed to raise Katsuki into a sitting position and said, Katsuki, you mustn't move. Here, let me help you. Katsuki gritted his teeth as Inko showered him with more admiration than his own mother did, but that was his fault. Would you like anything? An apple, some water? I can call a nurse for you. The thing that hurt the most was how much he didn't deserve Inko's kindness, even though he was the one who was constantly attempting to do everything alone, as if he didn't need anyone. I'm too cowardly to tell her that I made Izuku's life a living hell, so she is unaware of it. I'm pitiful. Well, Katsuki thought. Inko had been faithfully caring for him here with his own parents for the past few weeks, not realizing what a jerk he was. No, I have to tell her that this ends today. Taking a deep breath, Katsuki said, no Aunt Inko, that's okay, I don't need anything. I have something to tell you. Inko sat down and paid close attention after sensing the gravity of Katsuki's next remarks. I'm so sorry, if I could take it back, I would. I'd be the best friend Izuku ever had, but I can't, and now I can't even make up for it. Katsuki sobbed as he stared at the ceiling. I bullied Izuku ever since we were kids. Every chance I got I made fun of him for not having a quirk, and mocked him for wanting to be a hero. Everything he did I belittled it, Katsuki said. Inko calmly said, I knew. She then grabbed the knife and one of the apples and started chopping it into bite-sized pieces. Katsuki gave Inko a startled look. She briefly raised her head from the apple to meet Katsuki's gaze before going back to work. I've always known Katsuki, and to be honest I hated you for it. I wanted nothing more than to hurt you as much as you hurt Izuku, and the only reason I didn't was because Izuku begged me not to. Inko inhaled deeply. Izuku made excuse after excuse for you, saying you didn't mean it, or you were being pressured by other kids to make fun of him, and he forgave you for it because that's what a hero does. I couldn't betray Izuku's resolve to see the good in you, so I sat by as you abused my son. I hate you for it right now. But I know that when Izuku comes home he's going to want to be there for you, and until he can I'll be here for him. Inko said as she set the freshly chopped apple down the middle of Katsuki. You should eat something. When Inko said that Izuku had been stronger than Katsuki had thought, Katsuki was astounded, and the guilt caused his stomach to turn over. He bent over the apple plate, tears streaming down his cheeks and onto the plate beneath. A knock on the door was followed by the arrival of All Might and Detective Tsukachi. I have something else to tell you, Auntie, and it concerns Bane's identity. All Might shook his head and said, did we hear you right, young Bakugo? You know Bane's identity? Please accept my apologies for not coming to see you earlier, Bakugo. I jumped ahead of myself first and foremost. All Might dropped to his knees and pressed his forehead to the ground. Bakugo swallowed, looked down at his hero on his knees, and shook his head. I know nothing I say can make up for the mistake of allowing you to be hurt. But even so, from the bottom of my heart I offer you my humblest and sincerest apology. All Might, I brought this on myself, and the last bit of it is a result of what I did. Whether it's karma or divine justice, I accept it as my own fault, and no one else is to blame for me losing my quirk and getting hurt. I say I know who Bane is, but it's just a gut feeling, and Bane himself contradicted my theory, but here goes. I think that Izuku Midoriya is Bane. All Might stood up as the room clattered and the greenette's haste through the chair Inko had been sitting into the ground. Inko glared down at Bakugo's bowed head and yelled, "How dare you? You say you're sorry for harassing my son, but then you call him the monster that broke your back," Inko exclaimed, her face streaming with tears of rage. Inko gathered her purse and walked past the two men before leaving the room, saying, "He was your best friend. My son would never do the things he's done, no matter how much someone deserved it. You're a liar." All Might looked at Bakugo and coughed. All Might scratched his head, as though the name Izuku Midoriya was somehow familiar to him. "Go ahead, young Bakugo, tell us why you think this." Bakugo took a swallow. Katsuki almost choked when he had to repeat the villain's words. "Well, first Bane knows about Izuku. He mentioned his name to me when we were fighting, and when I questioned him about it he said he killed Izuku. But Bane was so familiar with me as if he knew everything about me. The things he said about how I start a fight with a right hook, and how he was able to counter me so easily as if he knew what I'd do." Sukachi gave his chin a rub. It doesn't make sense for Bane to bring up Izuku on his own initiative, even though, from what I've seen of Bane, he seems like a seasoned combatant. It could just be his experience with fighting that got the best of you. To himself, Sukachi thought. "If Bane is Izuku, why would he do this to you? After all, you two were friends, right?" Sukachi inquired. Katsuki shook his head, looking down in embarrassment. With a sigh, Katsuki concluded his presentation of all the evidence he had. "He was a friend to me, but I was a bully for him. I bullied him for not having a quirk." Katsuki acknowledged, "The thing that really gets me is what he said right before he injured me. He whispered, 'Goodbye, Kachan.' Izuku was the only one who called me that." Sukachi gave the explanation a nod. "I see bullying is wrong on any level and it can lead to outcomes such as this, but you said the boy was quirkless." Bane traded blows with All Might. That kind of strength could only come from a quirk. Unable to shake the suspicion that he might know this boy, All Might asked, "Do you have a picture of this Izuku Midoriya?" As he reached for his phone and flipped through some of the photos, Katsuki discovered one and gave it to the top hero, All Might, who started to perspire as he glanced at the child in the photo with Sukachi peering over his shoulder. The image showed Katsuki standing above a boy with green hair who was clearly afraid of Katsuki. "That day's rooftop boy is this one?" All Might coughed while returning the phone and attempting to hide his hands trembling. As All Might started to leave, Sukachi noticed something strange about him and followed him. "Thank you, young Bakugo, we'll go now and give you time to rest." They ended up in an empty hallway, and Sukachi asked, "All Might, what's wrong?" All Might turned to look at him. All Might looked at Sukachi, who shook his head and said, "I know that boy Sukachi. After I saved him, he asked me if he could be a hero without any quirk, and I told him no. What if my words put him on this path as a villain?" All Might listen. "I don't think Izuku is Bane. After all, we established that he had no quirk, and even you said Bane's blows were on par with yours. No quirkless child could do that, and even if Izuku is Bane, your words were meant to encourage him to pursue other paths. If he took your words as a reason to pursue villainy, that's not your fault, but as I've said, I don't believe Izuku Midoriya is Bane. To ease your mind, I'll investigate the child and bring back what I find. If he was hiding a quirk, which I highly doubt is possible, I'll find out." Sukachi put a hand on All Might's shoulder before departing the hospital. He took it from his pocket and opened the principal's text message. Bane opened the gate to a scrapyard he had begun visiting when he first began taking his venom, and he unlocked the padlock. After using his newfound strength to crush a few cars for the man until the owner could fix his crusher, he was given permission to enter. He had decided to forego payment in exchange for complete access to the scrapyard whenever he desired, which was good practice. It would now be the ideal location for him to train Magna and Muscular, and the owner was more than happy to accept. He led them into the very center of the scrapyard, where the tall walls of scrap metal concealed the two villains who were pursuing him. The noise they were going to make would be mistaken for the crusher if someone happened to walk by and heard it. Bane let his jacket fall onto a rusty washing machine nearby. He glanced at his two countrymen and cracked his knuckles. Magna had a serene exterior with her huge magnet resting on her shoulders, and Muscular was clearly ready to start based on his constant flexing. From this moment forward, we're a team. That means we need to always be in sync, know each other's battle style as well as our own. Until our next assignment, we will be in here everyday training until we're a well-oiled machine of battle. Understand? He yelled as Muscular and Magna nodded in agreement. As usual, Muscular boasted, "Don't worry boss, I'm the entire battle machine you'll ever need." "You're a brute and there's more to battle than physical strength. Brains are needed more than strength," Magna replied. As the two argued, Bane used this opportunity to remove 3 of his new venom patches. Since he was aware that each of these was equivalent to roughly 3 doses of his prior venom, applying 3 patches at once would have 9 times the potency. He inhaled deeply. Normally, this would be enough to kill him, but he needed to understand the boundaries of his healing factor, and he wasn't willing to chop off his head to see if it regrows. He placed the 3 patches under the sleeve in a circle around his left bicep. His normal stature of 6 feet was increased to 8 as the drug instantly changed his body, causing his muscles to grow so large that his skin started to tear. However, his healing factor took care of it. He gasped a little as the tingling sensation of his regeneration undoing the harm caused swiftly overcame the pain of the transformation. As he approached a car and tore the driver's side open before throwing it in the direction of the entrance, he told the 2 quarreling villains, "Brain and Brawn in perfect harmony is an unbeatable pair, now the exercise is simple. You 2 need to work together to get past me and honk the horn in that car. You do that, the exercise is over, otherwise we will do it again and again until you can or until the sun sets. Come at me full force or you won't get anywhere, there will be no breaks. If you stop coming for me, I'll come for you. If you understand, then let the exercise begin." He stated that, taking a combative position and awaiting them to take the initiative. Muscular grinned as his skin exploded with muscle fibers that covered his shoulders and ankles, making him taller than Bane. He bounded at Bane like a freight train, yelling, "You think I need this guy to get this done? You're underestimating me, boss." Bane let out a sigh, hoping that Muscular would at least try to work with Magna. However, Muscular would never comprehend it until it was hammered home to him. Bane sidestepped outside the punch as Muscular got close, grabbed his arm, and used his forward momentum to spin and throw him to the right, where he crashed into a heap of scrap. Bane saw Magna emerge from his blind spot as Muscular took off, and she swung her enormous magnet at Bane's head. I assumed Magna would try to sneak attack Muscular by taking advantage of his haughtiness and impatience. It's not a bad idea, but she's relying on that magnet a little too much. As he approached Magna, Bane thought, caught the magnet beneath his arm to prevent it from gaining momentum, and then punched Magna in the stomach. Unexpectedly, Magna dropped her weapon right away in order to dodge back, but neither of them realized how strong Bane's punch was because the wind pressure it produced sent Magna flying backward, causing her to topple over before getting back on her feet. When Bane realized how powerful his new venom was, he was taken aback. This made him vulnerable, and Muscular struck him from behind, launching him into the air and dropping Magna's magnet in the process. Before the tingling of his regeneration healed him, Bane coughed, tasted blood, and felt pain rush through his back. That moron came at me when he had the opportunity to go for the car. As dust flew up around him, Bane thought as he straightened himself in midair and used his newly discovered strength to launch another punch, sending wind rushing down towards Muscular, who blocked with his muscle-clad arms. As Muscular drew his arms away to boast, Bane landed on him with both feet in his chest, sending the villain to his back on the ground, leaving a crater around the 2. "Come on boss, give me more," Muscular exclaimed. The magnet smashed into Bane's arms as he squatted over Muscular, turning and raising his arms in a boxer's block to stop Magna's swing. Bane was knocked off Muscular and landed sliding across the ground, leaving 2 long furrows in the dirt. He felt his skin tear and his bones crack, and as he stood up and looked at his 2 allies, he felt his arms start to heal. Muscular was coughing violently while lying on his back. The only reason Bane hadn't collapsed Muscular's chest was because of the thickness of muscle fibers encircling his body. As the dust started to settle, Bane got to his feet, gritting his teeth as his flesh and bones were reassembled, and feeling blood trickle down his arms. Bane showed his hand to himself in a "come on" gesture, taunting the boys, "Alright boys, come on, you haven't gotten close to that car at all." Magna saw Bane and realized how powerful the man she worked for was. Bane was more than just a muscle-bound moron like Muscular, he was also a strategist. As he stated, the combination of intelligence and strength is incomparable. Magna reflected to herself. Magna said, "Look, I don't like working with you, but we have to or else he'll pound us flat," as Muscular stood up and spat out some blood. Magna gritted her teeth as he walked forward, ready to go again, saying, "I don't need you to get this done, just stay out of my way. We can't beat him alone, you need to work with me." Magna attempted to kill him again, figuring that it would be simple, but if he succeeded, Bane would undoubtedly kill her. Muscular screamed, "You do whatever you want, I'm going for it," and bounded forward at Bane again. Bane let out a sigh, indicating that it was time to remove the kid gloves. He had assumed that by being lenient with them, they would naturally reconcile, but it appears that more drastic measures were required. As Muscular mirrored the motion, Bane also leapt forward and threw a punch. Their fists collided, sending out wind that blew away the dust that was still in the air and broke some of the car windows. Bane didn't give him time as he dropped into a crouch, circled around behind, and grabbed Muscular by the waist. Bending over backwards, he suplexed Muscular, who brought his hands above his head to prevent being driven into the ground. Muscular had reared back for another punch. The wrestling move caused the earth to crack, but Muscular remained unmoved. Both villains stood up as Bane rolled out from under Muscular. Bane ran to give Muscular a flying knee, colliding with him as Muscular tried to crush him by grabbing Bane in a bear hug. Bane grinned and started to pry Muscular's arms away from him, realizing that no matter how many fibers Muscular added, he would not be able to hold Bane. Bane gave Muscular one last shove, then grabbed his head and pulled him into a headbutt, bringing the villain to his knees. Just as Bane was about to punch Muscular in the face, a car horn sounded. Muscular's arms swung wide. When Bane turned around, she saw Magna slamming her hand on the horn inside the car he had thrown towards the front. "Thanks for holding him off, you stupid bastard," Magna replied. Pulling a moaning Muscular to his feet with blood streaming from his forehead, Bane grinned. Bane's phone rang as he was outlining the plan for tomorrow. "You two did well, but we're far from where we need to be, but we're getting there. Muscular, go back to the hideout. Magna, you're free to go, we'll meet here tomorrow where the teams will be switched." He went to his jacket, pulled out his phone, and saw that it was Fat Cat's number. It had been a while since he had spoken to the Underworld broker. Bane's own drug was used to set Fat Cat up during their most recent encounter. Although it was a highly diluted form of his venom, it was still a super steroid that was undoubtedly used in the sports industry to keep money in his pocket and satisfy Fat Cat. He heard his broker's voice respond, and he asked, "What is it, Fat Cat?" The phone call was immediately cut off. "Bane, we have a situation. It looks like there's a spy in my gang, and I need your help to flush him out. Meet me at my warehouse outside the city. I'll explain everything there." Bane looked to see that Magna and Muscular had gone, and he rubbed his chin. As he put on his jacket and made his way to the train station, he spoke the words, "Just as well, I didn't want to tell them about this." He would be able to work on a puzzle he had been putting off for some time, and the train would carry him most of the way. He had been attempting to find the vampire of Musutafu for some time now, but the murderer was a total mystery. Bane started to compile all of his knowledge about the vampire in his mind as soon as he boarded the train. Every victim of at least a dozen attacks had their blood completely drained. What was left over was soaked into their clothing. With the exception of one or two female victims, the majority of the victims were men, indicating a female killer. Every victim had multiple cuts, a sign of torture. The wounds point to the possibility of a small knife switchblade. Bane attempted to create a profile for the murderer while running a hand through his short green hair. Other than the fact that the majority of the victims were adults, there was no connection between them. Each of them was a typical individual. For what reason was their blood being drawn? If the goal was money, it would be better to knock over a blood bank because blood isn't worth much on the black market. No, there must be a deeper meaning to the thrill of murdering people and drawing their blood. Perhaps it is related to their peculiarity? Bane's thoughts were interrupted when the door ahead of him opened, allowing him to leave. He started the quick walk to Fat Cat's warehouse, which he found with ease, and saw the car parked in front of it, but no one was inside. Fat Cat never drove himself anywhere, as far as he knew, so that was odd. Bane approached the door and opened it to reveal Fat Cat seated on an antique metal drum. The Fat Cat leapt from it and rushed towards Bane. With venom still running through his body, Bane crunched the door's metal in his fist and glared down at Fat Cat, saying, "Glad you made it. Good news, I caught the spy." Bane roared, slamming the door behind him and asking, "If you caught him, why am I here?" He had considered killing Fat Cat, particularly if his organization was compromised, but he might end up killing him for squandering his time. Fat Cat pawed at a tiny bathroom in the back and said, "Easy there, big guy, I didn't have him until right after I called you. See, it was my driver, he got wind I was bringing you here and he tried to off me, so I took him down and then threw him in there." Bane walked over to the bathroom and asked, "So why haven't you killed him?" Bane opened the door, rolling his eyes as he realized Fat Cat only wanted him here to do his dirty work. Fat Cat said, "Oh, figured you'd want to get whatever info out of him, after all you're more suited for torture than me." Bane's eyes widened as he opened the door, and he then spun on his heel to catch the blade Fat Cat had attempted to stab him with. He swatted the portly cat away from him, the blade cutting straight through the flesh of his palm. It's unbelievable that I didn't anticipate that attack. There was absolutely no sense of intent to kill. Bane's gaze shifted from the knife piercing the back of his hand to the arm he had slashed Fat Cat with, which was covered in some sort of goo. He yelled, "Who are you?" while glancing back at the actual Fat Cat's body in the closet. Wearing only his trousers, Fat Cat sat on the toilet lid, his face and chest crisscrossed with cuts. His blood stained his once orange and black fur red. He appears to have died from blood loss after going into shock. He had been here for at least a week based on the amount of blood that had dried and seeped into his pants. It was only by chance that he turned in time to prevent the knife from severing his throat. The only reason he had turned around had been to see the corpse in the closet. Fat Cat said in a girl's voice, "Oh, you were good. I was sure I was going to kill you right then and there. But of course the mighty Bane wouldn't be killed so easily." The cat's face started to fall off, revealing the face of a young girl with big canines and golden eyes. She leapt out of his way and landed behind some boxes. Bane had observed that the girl was nude. He assumed she was wearing an oversized sweater that reached her mid-thigh when she soon came out from behind the boxes. Bane clutched the knife in his palm and yanked it out as blood splattered on the floor and trickled from his fingers before the wound started to close. "The name is Himiko Toga and I'm your biggest fan, Bane. Though I had no idea you looked so cute under that mask, though you could stand for a bit more blood on you." That caused Toga's smile to widen and her eyes to enlarge. As Bane looked back at Fat Cat's disfigured body, he arched a brow and said, "You really are perfect for me. Anything I do to you, you'll heal from it. I can cut you so much without you dying on me. You're the best, come on, let me cut you, let me join you." Things started to come together. He turned back to Toga and said, "You're the vampire of Musutafu." He barely avoided a knife she had thrown at him. "Boo, you're really good at dodging for a big guy, but that's fine, once I join you I'll have plenty of chances to cut you, so come on, let me join." Bane grumbled. Although he had been following the vampire, he was unaware of her extreme insanity. However, since he had already diverted Muscular's bloodlust, he might be able to do the same here. However, the fact that she was obsessed with cutting him was an extra burden he didn't want to handle. As Toga's face flushed, Bane asked, "Why do you want to join me? What's in it for you besides cutting me up?" After witnessing Bane's brutality against Death Arms, she became fixated on him. She couldn't handle seeing Bane covered in the hero's blood. From that moment on, she was in love. She had tried everything to locate Bane, but nothing seemed to work until she heard that this guy, Fat Cat, was acquainted with Bane. She took him and then put him in another place until she got all the information she required from him. Either Fat Cat was desperate to keep his meal ticket or he was loyal to Bane, but days of torture will make anyone reconsider. Toga shouted, "You're so mean, acting like you don't know, but fine, I'll play your game. It's because I have a crush on you, silly. You're just like me, you like to hurt people. You know people are only beautiful when they're covered in blood, like you should be." Bane did nothing to stop Toga from stabbing her in the chest, but the blade pierced Bane's chest enough that it wasn't fatal because of the growth of muscle. Bane took hold of Toga and held her against his chest. Gazing into Toga's golden eyes with his green ones, he said, "You want to cause pain in this world, to tear it to bloody shreds. I can work with that." Even though she was insane, he could still use her in the end. She was nearly a perfect replica of Fat Cat, and whatever her peculiarity was, it allowed her to sneak into places. He was still unsure of how she would conceal her intention to kill. Perhaps it was the fact that a girl was interested in him, or perhaps he needed someone with her abilities. Even though she was crazy, Bane wasn't going to tell himself that it was nice to have a girl after him. Bane's face was so close to Toga's that she could feel his heart pounding against her chest and his blood soaking her sweater, causing her face to turn beet red. Dropping her to the ground, Bane removed the knife from his chest and felt the wound close. He looked at her and then threw the knife back at her, cutting her cheek as it embedded itself in the concrete behind her. "That's the only time I'll let you bleed me, understand? If you try again, maybe I'll make you beautiful too." Bane watched Toga clutch the wound on her cheek as she stood up. "If you're going to join me, you're going to be useful. You've been impersonating Fat Cat for days now, right? You're going to continue to do so. You're going to make Fat Cat's organization mine." Toga jumped over to him and put her bloody palm on Bane's chest, saying, "I don't want to be him anymore, I want to with you." As Bane sighed and considered a different strategy, Toga begged, "I promise not to cut you anymore if you let me come with you." "Fine, call Fat Cat's men here. Use his voice, make it seem like he's dying, and tell his men to come to me with his death. Once they contact me, I'll bring them into my fold under the premise that I'll find Fat Cat's killer." Right as you see the men arrive, set the place ablaze. They won't have time to investigate too thoroughly, not with the police and fire department on their way to contain the fire. This way we both get what we want. Bane said while looking at Toga as she doodles on his shirt with the blood they had mixed. Are you listening to me? Toga nodded, looking up at him. Bane took an old receipt out of his pocket and wrote down the scrapyard's address. Sure, I heard everything, so where are we going to meet up? He asked. He walked away from her and said, meet me there tomorrow. Toga cupped her injured cheek with a smile on her face after staring at the bloody palm print she had left on his chest. Before skipping over to the car and taking the keys out of her sweater, Toga said, we each marked the other. We're a couple. I can't believe it, I'm so happy. She then started the car, drove it inside the building, and turned it off. She discovered a bottle of antifreeze in the trunk after exiting the vehicle. Grinning, she carried the bottle to the door and started to pour it out, creating a trail that led back to the car, where she threw it directly beneath it. Toga made his way to the building's entrance to summon Fat Cat's men. Later that day, Bane arrived home and turned on the television to watch the UA Sports Festival. As he watched two students battle, he grinned. As Bane sat down, his phone rang and he took it out, recognizing Kurogiri's number. I thought they'd do something like this. Hold the sports festival early so the villains don't have a chance to regroup and attack. That's fine, I had no intention of attacking the sports festival. Let them have this small win, I'll attack them again once I've got my team in shape. He inquired, what is it, Kurogiri? Bane gritted his teeth as Kurogiri called All for One their master, which really got under his skin. However, he would only have to maintain this charade for a little while longer. Sorry to bother you, Bane, but I felt it best to let you know that Tamura has taken your advice of gathering allies to heart. Already he's gathered several members, but he has his eye on one man in particular, but I think it's too much for him, and our master agrees with me. Bane sat forward and observed the next two pupils to engage in combat, asking, so what does he want from me? I wonder how many of his classmates will place at the top, as I seem to remember that Katsuki was in class 1A. Well, there's no easy way to say this. Tamura has his eyes on a death row inmate called Moonfish. Meaning he wants to break into a prison. Bane cracked a grin. You know that's not a bad idea, Kurogiri. I think Tamura has it right. What better place to find villains than in a jail? I'll lend a hand, but this is going to take considerable time and planning. If Tamura agrees to this, I'll be more than happy to help. Bane replied. Tamura is desperate to prove himself to All for One, as I believed. Kurogiri, who had hoped that Bane would try to talk Tamura out of this, was perspiring. However, it appeared that the man was more than happy to comply with this madness. Before speaking, Kurogiri swallowed. He hung up after saying, I'll see what I can do to get him to agree. Bane tossed his phone aside and glanced at his TV screen. So it seems Katsuki's class had a clean sweep. The son of Endeavor Shoto Todoroki came in first place, followed by Fumikage Tokiyami. Although the third-place finisher was unable to attend in person, Tenya Iida's name was announced. I'm not shocked that the child who genuinely attempted to shield All Might from me was the son of Endeavor, who won first place. I'll need to keep an eye on these three, but for the time being, I need time to prepare. He had not seen Mrs. Midoriya since the day he had accused Bane of being Izuku, and according to his mother, she had not spoken to her either. Bakugo sat in the backseat of his parents' car as they drove away from the hospital, and after weeks of being there, he was ready to see that place in the rearview mirror. He felt bad for creating such a rift between the two families, but he refused to be swayed. If Bane wasn't Izuku, then his best friend was dead. Is it selfish of me to prefer you be the villain who hurt me than be dead? He asked himself as his parents pulled up in front of a large family restaurant. Why are we in this place? As his parents exited and his father opened the door for him, Katsuki asked, gritting his teeth and holding back the rage he was about to give his father for treating him like an invalid. His back was fine now, except for occasional pain flare-ups and a persistent soreness. He wasn't some cripple. Katsuki got out of the car and headed for the restaurant. His mother opened the door for him to see that most of his classmates were holding a banner that said, Welcome Katsuki Bakugo. And your friends from school agreed with us. Mitsuki grinned as the children gathered around her son. Well Katsuki, we figured now that you're out of the hospital you might want to celebrate. Momo, who was wearing a long-sleeved pink shirt, a white knee-length skirt, and appropriate dress shoes, smiled broadly and put her hand on her chest as she said, Congratulations on a speedy recovery Bakugo. You'll be in top form in no time, I'm sure of it. Mina, wearing a purple hoodie that had been unzipped to reveal a black t-shirt over jeans and sneakers, shouted, striking a victory pose. He noticed that Shoji, Koda, and Tokiyami were in the back, raising their drinks to him rather than getting involved with the crowd that was encircling him. Alright guys, back up and give him some space, plus we're kind of blocking the entrance. Kirishima said, stepping in front of Bakugo and herding everyone back a few feet so Katsuki could make his way to their table. The Bakugo parents went outside without the students noticing, wanting to leave their son in the care of his friends for a while, as standing for extended periods of time would seriously strain his back, so it was best to sit down quickly. He looked around at everyone around him, but he didn't really know them all. He probably couldn't name them all from memory aside from Ochako, who was sitting on his left and conversing with the frog girl Ashido, or was it Asui? Kirishima sat on his right looking like some bouncer while Denki was discussing what to order. He only knew Momo because she was her class's vice president, and he also saw that Iida was missing. Where is Iida? Knowing that Ochako was perhaps the person closest to Iida besides himself, Bakugo leaned over to inquire. Oh, yeah, Iida was unable to attend due to a family emergency. Bakugo nodded, noticing the shrimp Mineta eyeing the seaweed chick, whose name he assumed was Tokake, who was animatedly speaking to Mina and the invisible girl. He said he's sorry, Ochako said, looking down regretfully, recalling the face Iida was making when he left. Before an earphone jack was inserted into his ear, causing him to fall to his knees, Aoyama said, "Don't worry Bakugo, I'll twinkle that much brighter to make up for the absence of Iida and Todoroki." Bakugo watched as the sugar guy and the guy with the tail helped Aoyama from the floor to the table while he nursed his ear. Jiro said, "How about you twinkle a little less, you're bothering other customers." The class appeared to be enjoying themselves, all for his benefit. Bakugo clenched his fists on his knees and looked down, whispering to himself, "I don't deserve this." Kirishima had heard some of what he said. Before Bakugo slapped his hand away, Kirishima clapped him on the shoulder and said, "Yeah, you deserve this buddy, so live it up, because we're your friends." "None of you are my friends." The entire restaurant was silenced as he yelled, "I don't have friends. The only one I had was a bully to him. He was oddball, so I bullied him. I don't deserve this. You all think I'm a good guy, but I'm a complete and utter piece of shit," he said, getting to his feet and glaring at his students. "The only person who recognized me for who I was is no longer with us. He is either dead or the monster who attacked me. Therefore, no, I do not wish to be your friend." He looked at his hand, not even a hint of smoke emanating from his palms to remind him of his helplessness, and said, "I deserve to be punished for what I've done. You all are aware. The doctors say there is nothing physically wrong with me, so I lost my quirk. They claim it's psychological, but there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to use it." He collapsed into his chair, sweating profusely as his stunned classmates took in his words. "They say I'm doing this to myself, and maybe I am, because the one person who should punish me for what I've done is gone." Bakugo looked up to see Ochako holding his hand in both of hers, saying, "I think the fact that you're telling us this means you are a good person, Bakugo. You believe that you should be punished for being a bad person, so you've done this to yourself because you don't want to be that person anymore, right?" A shocked Bakugo was asked, "You want to make up for the mistakes you made with your friend, by Ochako?" Bakugo looked at Ochako and he swore he saw Izuku staring back at him. It was like the day he fell at the river and Izuku held his hand out to ask if he was okay, but he slapped it away and has hated him ever since. That's as good as anyone can hope to be. Squeezing Ochako's hand as he started to cry, Kirishima bit his lip while sitting next to his broken friend. "Wait, are you saying Bane was your friend?" Kirishima said. He couldn't do that again, he'd take the hand offered to him this time. After training his team for almost a month, and everyone was finally up to his standards to go out into the field, Bane left the bathroom and went barefoot to the kitchen. Tonight would be their first mission, and they were going to carry out Tamura's jailbreak plan. He was excited about the prospect of doing this after researching the inmates housed there and having his roster of recruits ready. He stopped in the living room when he noticed a large box in the center of the floor, growled, ducked, grabbed an arm that had been aimed at the back of his head, flipped the person over his shoulder onto their back, and drove his fist towards their face, stopping just inches before he collapsed in Toga's skull. He let go of her with a growl. Bane was shocked that she had discovered his residence, but he was also upset about the sneak attack. As she twirled around in her apron, Toga simply grinned at Bane and said, "That's a hell of a greeting for your girlfriend." Fortunately, she had something underneath her apron, which just so happened to be one of his shirts. Bane went to considerable measures to keep his living quarters hidden from his subordinates. As he entered the kitchen, Bane scratched his head and said, "I asked you a question. Isn't it clear that I obtained it via Gato's computers? I came with a gift that you didn't open because, out of all the buildings he was in charge of, yours was the only one that wasn't an apartment complex." As she watched Bane rummage through the refrigerator for a variety of breakfast ingredients, Toga yelled while pouting. As he began preparing breakfast, he said, I underestimated your thoroughness of Gato's holdings after I became the leader of Fat Cat's men. It's not really a present if I'm the one who paid for it, he said, referring to Gato, which was Fat Cat's real name, which he had learned after absorbing the majority of Gato's organization. As he put toast in the toaster and cracked eggs into a pan, he remarked, You're more of the delivery girl. As Bane pushed the scrambled eggs onto 2 plates while the toast exploded from the toaster, Toga hopped up on the counter next to him and watched him cook. You can cook, how domestic of you, she said, sticking her finger up his bicep and prodding his bare shoulder. So what's in the case anyway? It was locked and only you know the code. Bane put a piece of toast on each plate, took a pitcher full of smoothie mixture, and poured it out for them. After putting some jam on his bread and eating his toast and eggs, he said, After training with the 3 of you for so long I've rediscovered the need for armor. Taking a bite out of her egg and running her teeth along the tines of the fork, Toga asked, Why would you need armor? You can heal from anything? As she looked at Bane, who sighed in response to her query. Like muscles, quirks require energy to function. You exhaust yourself when you run too long, and your muscles give out when you lift too much weight. My regeneration is no different. Healing those wounds requires stamina, and the more severe the wound, the more stamina is required. He finished his breakfast and put the plate in the sink before moving to the case on the floor and setting it on the kitchen table. He said, I can't have myself getting exhausted too early in a fight, so the need for armor. He then flipped through the case's numbers to find the access code, and when it opened, he saw his new suit, a black bodysuit, and started explaining its features to Toga. It is protected by 2 layers. The first layer is made up of armor that is placed over the back, arms, thighs, calves, and chest. This armor has reinforced joints for optimal flexibility and mobility, as well as a Kevlar bi-weave that can deflect any bullet short of a straight-shot impact and stop slashing weapons. Toga grinned at the painful and destructive function of the gloves, stating, The gloves are lined with a metal mesh designed for gripping much like that of a shark's skin. He illustrated this by dragging his palm down the doorway and watching as the gloves gouged deep furrows out of the wood. Bane then produced his black painted helmet, which had a green mouthpiece and red eyes. The helmet is made of full steel and it magnetically locks into the suit collar, Bane explained. Bane pulled out a pair of large gauntlets that would extend all the way to his elbows, but what really caught Toga's attention was the large contraption at the wrist. The second layer are these steel plates that go on the shins and knees, and then for my arms I had these made. Bane hadn't told her about the veins running through the suit into the mouthpiece of the mask to deliver his aerosolized venom. What is this doing? As she asked, Bane gave her a menacing smile that nearly stopped her heart. He put on the gauntlet and said, Let me show you. He then walked out the door to the trash-covered beach and picked out a refrigerator, gripped it, and punched it, causing a large dent to form. However, a second after the first impact, there was another that punched a hole in the fridge door, and Bane pulled back, revealing that the front of the gauntlet had partially ejected, making another impact into the fridge before slamming it back into place. These gauntlets are like pistons, giving me a second impact after the first, a deadly 2-for-1 combo. He looked at Toga and said, I'll be putting this suit through its paces tonight. Toga nodded enthusiastically, prepared to assist Bane. The security camera monitor for Orochi Prison's night shift, jail, was looking at the monitors to make sure everything was in order, just like he had done every work night for the past year. Guarding these criminals day in and day out was boring as hell, but it was especially so when he heard the door being unlocked behind him and turned to see the prison warden, Kimusho, enter and put down a small bag. Sir, what are you doing here this late? As the warden approached him, Jail inquired. As Jail returned his attention to the monitors, Kimusho said, Something just didn't feel right, so I decided to stay over just in case anything was to happen. Pardon me, sir, but I don't think anything will happen because this prison has a perfect record. Who would be crazy enough to? A knife pierced Jail's throat just then, causing his blood to splash across some of the screens as he collapsed, choking on his own blood. I told you something wasn't right, didn't I? You should have paid attention to me, said the warden as he went to the console and began typing in instructions before placing his hand on a palm scanner. Manual override, all cell doors released. The face of Kimusho dropped off, revealing the face of Toga painted over with Bane's symbol, a green pattern starting at her chin and coming around her eyes as she turned on the intercom, her voice blasting throughout the entire prison. All you released prisoners. I'm Himiko Toga, and Bane has come here today to give you all the opportunity to take part in something incredibly enjoyable. It would be a shame if you didn't applaud him when he arrives. I will ensure that you all have your throats cut. All right, goodbye. As she proceeded to the bag she had brought and pulled out her costume, Toga completed destroying the console. In his new suit, Bane stood with Magna and Muscular behind him. Magna wore black muscle shirt with Bane's symbol on it, along with black and white camouflage pants and boots. Magna, on Bane's left, had red lensed glasses, jeans, and a green shirt underneath a black jacket and dress shoes. Tamura's group was right next to Bane's, with Kurogiri on his right, a swirling mass of blackness, and twice on his left, a man named Mr. Compress. Bane wasn't particularly impressed with Tamura's group, but it didn't matter because the worse off these guys were, the easier it would be to bring down Tamura and have them on his side. When he was actually giving his first dose of venom, Bane fidgeted with his helmet and said, "Nice work, Tamura. I'm sure All for One is proud of this turn of events." Tamura glared at him for a moment without saying anything, and then they heard Toga's voice over the loudspeakers outside the prison. "There's the signal, let's go." Bane growled as he grew larger before Kurogiri teleported them all into the prison courtyard entrance. Magna helped Compress with the outside security. Muscular, come with me. Magna followed Compress to send out the outside security guards who were frantically attempting to radio assistance. "I guess this is where we part ways, Tamura. I hope to see you and Moonfish back here," Bane said. As he passed through another Kurogiri-made portal, Tamura remarked, "Whatever, let's go Kurogiri you two twice." "Yes, Sir Tamura. Hold on, I'd like to accompany Bane." Bane and Muscular went to the prison's heavy doors, each grabbing hold of one and wrenching it open to reveal an armed platoon of security guards behind riot shields and shotguns aimed at Bane and Muscular. Twice shouted before jumping through the portal. Muscular grinned broadly as muscle fibers sprouted over his arms. "Get on your knees and put your hands behind your head, villains. This is your one and only chance," one guard yelled. "Remember what I promised you the day you joined me, Muscular?" Bane cracked his knuckles and asked. "Of course, boss, but why bring that up now?" Muscular asked, his bloodlust barely restrained. "Today, I fulfill my promise. Have fun." As the guards started firing, Bane said as he moved forward. "Check it out. Watch. V equals MT74QUJM6E. Stay in formation, men, we can." Muscular threw himself in front of Bane, taking all the bullets on himself as they seemed to bounce off the hurtling giant or get caught in his muscle fibers as he impacted into the wall of shields, shattering them as he grabbed hold of one guard, using him as a blunt object, and swung him into the others, watching the blood spray from the guard's mangled body as Muscular crushed him in his hand. Muscular then punched straight into another shield wall, causing the group of men to scatter as he did so. As Toga stood there, soaked from the blood that was gushing out of him, the guard's head was severed from his body and rolled to the ground. "Just like I promised, I made it, Bane." Bane and Toga headed to the isolation wing of the prison, where both of Bane's recruits were being held, before a number of guards blocked his path once more. Toga said as she followed behind Bane, leaving Muscular to his slaughter, his maniacal laughter following after him. "Men, open fire!" the lead guard yelled. As bullets bounced off him, Bane charged toward the wall of shields, noting the extra weight of Toga holding onto his back as she burst into hysterical laughter. He leapt high above the guards, then landed on one, crushing him beneath his shield before he threw his bloodied fists to his sides and swung his palm across one's face, feeling the skin rip and tear beneath his palm, leaving half of his face skinless, his lidless eyes staring at Bane before he was crushed beneath Bane's boot. Several of the guards started dogpiling on Bane, but only got knives in their bodies, while Toga stood on Bane's back, spinning like a top and fling knives everywhere. "That was fun, Bane. This is the best date night ever," Bane said as he got up and looked around at the destruction he had caused. Sitting on his shoulder, Toga yelled as Bane approached the high security door, which was made of solid steel, several feet thick, and had two enormous tumbler locks. "Who is this guy to require this level of security, boss?" Bane looked at the door and read the prisoner ID number as Muscular asked, rounding the corner and snatching a guard's neck in his hand. "Prisoner 198,530. Bane moved to the side, narrowly avoiding a skeletal man who grabbed hold of Muscular. "If you'd be so kind, Toga," he said, smiling, as Toga hopped down to the keypad and punched in a series of numbers while watching as the tumblers released and pulled back as the door opened. "What the devil?" As Toga and Bane watched, this once skeletal man started to grow in size until he was about half as tall as Muscular, while it appeared that Muscular's number of fibers had decreased. Muscular yelled in an attempt to get the man off. "Thank you so much for that, buddy. I haven't had a satisfying meal like that in a long time." Muscular gazed at the red-headed man in front of him, wearing only orange prison pants, and his green eyes were beaming with happiness. I'm completely full. What did you do to me, bastard? As more sinew started to grow from his arm in an attempt to crush the redhead in front of him, Muscular asked. However, the stranger caught it as Muscular brought his fist down, forcing his feet deeply into the ground. Wow, you still have this much strength after I absorbed at least half of it. You're a monster of some sort. As Jack looked at Bane, he said, Prisoner 198,530 name Jack Kisechu Quirk. Leech he can absorb approximately half of 3 people's strength into himself. Yes, I am aware of you. You are the one who has been causing trouble, and now you want to take advantage of me and claim me as your own? You seem to be aware of my quirk's weakness, he said, glancing at Bane before letting out a sigh. My quirk doesn't work if I can't make skin-to-skin contact. Before grinning, Jack remarked, Shame, I bet you're even stronger than this guy. Well, count me among the crew. The least I can do is offer you some support, and I don't mean jock support, either, since you went to the trouble of breaking me out. As he started to walk towards the opposite end of the solitary confinement wing, Bane clapped Jack on the shoulder and said, Good to hear, come on, we have another person to pick up. Glancing at the array of locked cell doors, none of which were as impressive as Jack's, Bane said, Muscular, Jack tear all these doors open, I want everyone loose. Muscular turned to the left and started tearing a door open, while Jack did the same on the right. Wow, boss, I already like you more. Jack ripped 2 doors off their hinges with ease and said, I sure wouldn't think twice about breaking these sad sobs out of here. Bane then moved to stand in front of a locked manhole. What's down there, Bane? Toga inquired as Bane punched the manhole inward and watched it fall into the shadows. 2 sets of green eyes then peered at him from the shadows before emerging to reveal a massive reptilian body with a mane of black hair that extended from its skull to the tip of its thick tail. Bane stood motionless, staring at Killer Croc, who roared, Use your words, you're not an animal. Not what Toga, who, this is Kuroko Dairu, otherwise known as Killer Croc. Killer Croc glared down his reptilian snout at Bane, his tail lashing before he opened his maw wide. Who are you? Bane moved forward to look directly into Croc's vertical pupil as Croc spoke in a hissing grunt. Who we are is irrelevant. What matters is our plan, and will you be involved? No one cares about you, Croc, Bane said, gazing at him. You're a criminal at best, and a monster at worst, but I care about that monster. In fact, I need that monster. Before I put on this mask, no one gave a damn about who I was. Now, everyone is afraid of what I might do next. Join me in making Croc feared and revered. Croc looked up at Bane once more after dropping his head and hissing. Bane nodded as he walked out of the high security wing and back towards the front entrance, observing a lone guard sitting in a corner with 3 criminals gathered around him. Croc said, Yes. I propose that we blow his mind and jam his gun up his ass, one yelled, laughing hysterically. Another said, licking a splintered piece of riot shield, There's no way we should cut his head off, fill it with shit, and drop it in the warden's chair. No, let's hang him. Bane was now standing behind the 3 of them. Bane grabbed the guard and said, No, I have a better idea. As an army of inmates pounded the prison's massive gate in an attempt to escape, Bane stepped outside the front entrance to find Kurogiri and the others waiting for him with a recently released moonfish. It took you long enough, and are these 2 freaks with you? Tamura yelled, gesturing to Jack and Croc. As he approached the group of inmates who had started to separate for him after learning who he was and what he had done, Bane said, Yes they are, and we'll leave in a moment. He stood at the head of the group of inmates before continuing, Behind you is a symbol of oppression, Orochi prison where you have languished under the name of one man. All power. All might who has been held up to you as the shining example of justice. The prisoners shouted in rage. The inmates roared once more as Bane turned and drew both of his fists back, driving them into the door's metal where his pistons slammed into the metal, pushing it even farther out. Bane reared back again and did it repeatedly, watching the door fall before him and then crashing to the ground, revealing the illuminated city of Musutafu. Musutafu is taken from the corrupt by us, the wealthy. We return it to you, the people, after generations of oppressors have kept you down with false promises of opportunity. Bane, Bane, Bane. Bane walked back into the prison yard toward Tamura and Kurogiri as the inmates ran forward, chanting his name repeatedly. As Tamura gritted his teeth behind his mask, he said, Now we can go. Go get me a tissue, man. That was gorgeous. As the villains were teleported out, Jack said, dabbing at a tear. Sukachi led All Might to the monitoring room, where he was shocked to see 3 words scrawled across the screens in blood. All for one. All Might felt his stomach drop as he entered the ruined front doors of Orochi prison in his hero costume and looked at all the bodies in the foyer. None of them were recognizable, all having been beaten to a pulp. He shook his head at the carnage that had been done here. Tsukachi pointed to a blood-free monitor and started playing a recording, saying, "I know what this means for you All Might, but this isn't the only reason I asked you here." Bane stood on the screen, clutching the security guard he had saved from the inmates by the back of his neck. "Hey everyone, I'm sure you're watching. After all, besides the top hero, who else would they call in? You have a choice, mister," Bane said, glancing down at the security guard who was on his knees, staring fearfully between Bane and the camera monitor. "Since you're there, I decided to give you a bit of special service." When the security guard realized what he was waiting for, Bane hesitated for a second. The guard replied, "Kinseki, Maro Kinseki. Mr. Kinseki, you have a choice, as I mentioned. You can leave if you say that this is your fault, but if you don't, I'll break a piece of you. Does that make sense?" Bane inquired as Kinseki gave a terrified nod. "The sick bastard, he's just toying with him." All Might gritted his teeth and snarled. "Now, Kinseki, who is to blame for your presence on your knees in the hopes of avoiding death?" As Kinseki inhaled deeply, Bane inquired. "Me?" Just before Bane's boot crushed his tibia and fibula, he asked. Kinseki roared in agony, nearly toppling over if Bane hadn't grabbed his neck and kept him on his knees. "Come on, don't you realize who is to blame for this? Kinseki, you're a smart guy. Someone ought to be present to prevent me from harming you, don't they? Who is it?" Through a fog of agony, Kinseki identified the response Bane was hoping for. "Everything. Might?" Bane leaned forward and Kinseki whispered. Bane tightly gripped Kinseki's neck and said, "Say it where they can hear you." "All power." Bane turned back to the camera as Kinseki roared. "Indeed, All Might is to blame. Shouldn't he be here to save you?" Bane exclaimed with delight. "Yes." Kinseki concurred. "I think he ought to stop me from doing this." "You're correct, however, he's not present, is he? He is not your savior. I take it he's not here to stop me?" "No, he's not." Bane stepped on Kinseki's head and drove it face first into the ground, saying, "And that's why this is his entire fault. He went to his grave knowing you're no hero All Might, and I'm going to show the rest of the world that too, because until you come for me I won't stop," Bane said. Bane told the camera, "I'll keep coming no matter what," and then he left the scene. With his blood-soaked fists from his fingernails digging into his palm, All Might stood in the dimly lit monitor room and declared, "I'm coming for you, Bane, and you all for one. I will finally put an end to your evil." As his students took their seats and greeted him, Shota Aizawa entered his classroom fully clothed in his typical sour demeanor. Before inhaling deeply, Aizawa gestured haltingly for his students to take their seats. "Good morning, Mr. Aizawa." Aizawa narrowed his eyes at the clamor from his entire class. "Before we begin class, I have two announcements, so listen carefully. First off, pertaining to your hero internships, they've been cancelled." With a moan, Kaminari slammed his head against the desk and exclaimed, "Well, no way, I was looking forward to that most of all after the year we've been having." Mina shook her fists in frustration at this new development and said, "Yeah, what's the deal, Mr. Aizawa?" However, Tenya Iida, the class representative, spoke louder and more forcefully than anyone else. Grasping the sides of his desk, Tenya exclaimed, "Mr. Aizawa, this is totally irrational. I mean, we need this. It is an essential component of our education as new heroes." Aizawa looked at Iida languidly. "Be that as it may, it can't be helped. You all know about the recent prison break. Heroes all over the country are doing everything they can to round up these criminals. They can't afford to have unlicensed children with them at a time like this. As such, many of your offers have been withdrawn." This idea made Iida go pale. There was no other way for him to ever get close to the hero killer, so this internship was essential. He had to pay the man who killed his older brother. As Aizawa went on, Iida sat down and stared down at his desktop. The students raised their heads from their pools of disappointment to hear their teacher's next words. "Now that you understand, I'll move on to my next announcement." As the classroom door opened and Hitoshi Shinso's face appeared, Aizawa said, "Effective immediately, we have a new student transferring into the hero course. Please welcome Hitoshi Shinso to Class 1A." As Shinso nodded, Kirishima said, "You're the guy who came over here to bust our chops before the sports festival." Shinso gave a little bow as his words started to sink in with the class. "Like I said, be careful or I'll steal your spots. Lucky for all of you, there was already a spot open. I look forward to working with you." Ochako asked, "Already a spot open?" before Kirishima pulled his hardened fist away from his desk and a shattering sound reverberated throughout the room. As their teacher's red eyes countered his hardening, Aizawa's scarf exploded out, encircling Kirishima. Don't you guys understand? This guy has come to take Bakugo's place. The classroom erupted in applause as the teacher said, I'll thank you not to break any more school property, Kirishima, but what you say is correct. The school staff has decided to drop Katsuki Bakugo from the hero course. Distressed for her friend, Ochako said, but why Mr. Aizawa Bakugo hasn't done anything to deserve being expelled? It's because he doesn't have a quirk Uraraka. Shoto Todoroki's icy reasoning pierced the group. You can't be a hero without a quirk, and we all know that Bakugo lost his. There's no point holding a seat open for someone who could never use it, so the teachers made the best decision in replacing him. Kirishima fought against Aizawa's scarf and yelled, say that again, Todoroki, I'll pound your face in. Bakugo was hurt, he didn't ask for any of this, and now you and the teachers want to give up on him? That's so messed up, and you call yourself a man? Aizawa's scarf jerked, knocking Kirishima to the ground. Aizawa jerked his scarf away from Kirishima's body and pointed to Shinso's seat in front of Setsuna Tokage, saying, that's enough, Kirishima. All the caterwauling in the world isn't going to change anything. Bakugo is gone and Shinso is here, make your peace with it, or get out. As Aizawa started teaching, he recalled the meeting with the teachers this morning and how many of his colleagues had reacted similarly to his remarks regarding Bakugo's removal from the program. Now then, let's get on with class. Cementos looked at Aizawa in shock and remarked, Aizawa, you can't be serious. This is one of your own students we're talking about here. It's not as if he's not a good student, he has one of the top 5 grades in your class, and his aptitude for combat is unbelievable. That doesn't matter if he doesn't have a quirk. Bakugo is a great student, I admit that, but he's suffered severe trauma to not only his body, but to his mind as well. If it was just his body, I wouldn't have any problem holding his seat until he fully recovered, but due to his mental trauma he's shut down his own quirk, and as we all know, wounds of the mind are not as easily healed as wounds of the flesh. It could take months or even years of talking with a therapist before he can use his quirk again. Am I supposed to put some other students' aspirations on hold because Bakugo got injured? Asked the other teachers. Aizawa has a point, without a quirk we can't exactly do much with the boy. It would be cruel to keep him here knowing he can't really do anything with the lessons we give him. Best to drop the bomb as soon as possible so the kid can recover without any added pressure. Snipe said with his arms crossed. Is this what we want the world to see from UA? That when our students are no longer useful we dump them like garbage? The world already has a poor view of the school after letting this happen to one of our students, and the outlook on heroes in general isn't the best right now, what with the struggle we're having in capturing the escaped villains. This will just be adding more fuel on that fire. Midnight turned to Principal Nezu, who had been silent this whole time. All of you raise good points, so I propose that we hold a vote to decide whether or not to remove Katsuki Bakugo from the hero course. Raise your hand. Nezu nodded, and every teacher except Cementos and Midnight raised their hands. Very well, I will call Bakugo's parents and inform them. Aizawa said from his seat, I'll go there in person after school and deliver the news myself. As his homeroom teacher and the faculty member who put this forward, it's my responsibility. As for recommendations for Bakugo's replacement, I would suggest Hitoshi Shinso. His performance in the sports festival was a great use of his quirk, and I've begun teaching him some capture techniques in my spare time. Nezu nodded before continuing. I see. I will take your recommendation under advisement, thank you, Aizawa. With a sigh, Aizawa headed home and picked up his one suit when the last bell rang, marking the end of the school day. Although he had never been a big fan of social interaction, it was necessary in situations like this. Once his hair was tied back, he called a cab and headed to the Bakugo home. After paying the fare, he went to the front door and knocked twice. Mitsuki Bakugo, the only woman in the house, opened the door right away. Yes, can I help you? She inquired, casting a suspicious glance at Aizawa. Mitsuki raised an eyebrow before beckoning Aizawa into her house and yelling, Yes, Mrs. Bakugo. I am Shota Aizawa, the homeroom teacher of your son's class 1A. May I come in? There's something I need to speak with you about. Mr. Bakugo walked out of a nearby room and rubbed the back of his head, saying, Masaru, Katsuki, we have a guest, get down here. Looking at Aizawa, he said, Mitsuki, you don't have to yell. He bowed slightly. Hello sir, welcome to our home. As Mitsuki and her husband took seats on the couch, leaving a space in the center for Katsuki, who came out of the hallway and saw Mr. Aizawa, Aizawa said, Pardon the intrusion. He stood behind the couch, ignoring the open seat in the center of his parents, and asked, Mr. Aizawa, what are you doing here? Stillness ran through the house, silencing everything, and said, "Well, now that you are all here, I'll start. There's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to come out with it. The principal has decided per my request to remove Katsuki from the hero course." Before Mitsuki exploded, it seemed as though time had stopped. She yelled, slamming her hands on the table, "You're doing what? It has come to our attention that Katsuki's quirk is gone. If it was just a physical injury we would be inclined to wait, but since it seems to have been brought on by a psychological trauma we can no longer hold his seat," Aizawa said while clenching his knees and bowed the others. "I apologize, but Katsuki cannot continue in the hero course without a quirk." "You're supposed to be a hero?" That response was completely inadequate, Mitsuki said, grabbing her glass of water and spilling it over Aizawa's head. "Despite being a role model, you come here and tell me that my son isn't allowed to attend your school because he lost his quirk. None of this would have occurred if you teachers hadn't been unable to keep your students safe. You want to simply get rid of him and act as though it never happened. I'll tell every news outlet how Ua treats them, and I won't let it happen." "Mom, stop it!" Katsuki rounded the couch and stood next to Aizawa, shouting from behind his angry mother, "Thank you, Mr. Aizawa, for giving me the chance to study at UA." As Katsuki straightened up and left for his room, he said, "I sincerely appreciate everything you taught me." Aizawa got up to tend to the young man. Aizawa was interrupted by Mitsuki's yelling, "If his quirk does come back we would be more than willing to have him ba. Leave my house now." As her husband gripped her shoulders, she yelled at the top of her lungs. Masaru dismissed Aizawa, who took the hint and left the parents and son, saying, "I think you've said enough, Mr. Aizawa, have a nice day." Aizawa let out a breath he had been holding since Mitsuki poured her drink on him. "I really am sorry, Katsuki." Sitting on the couch, Mitsuki was upset because it felt like everything was against her son. "Is this really right? I know Katsuki wasn't the best kid," she said, not addressing anyone specifically. She put her head in her hands and sobbed, thinking, he was conceited, irritable, and a bully, but this seems like more than the universe getting even. It seemed as though her son was cursed or something. How could anyone live like this? How could any parent survive their child suffering this much? Mitsuki thought, and then the image of Inko Midoriya appeared in her mind. "I need to talk to Inko." As she got up and headed to the front door to get her purse and put on her shoes, Mitsuki remarked, "Masaru, I'm going out for a little while to clear my head." She always knew what to do. As she walked away, she yelled. Mitsuki decided that walking would be more refreshing than driving to Inko's place, so she set off. She knew it was risky for a woman to be out this late because of all the escaped prisoners wandering the streets, but she didn't care because she could take care of herself. She soon reached the Midoriya household and knocked on the door, which was opened by Hisashi Midoriya, a man as tall as his wife, short, with deep red hair and a swimmer's build beneath his t-shirt and sweatpants. Mitsuki had always wondered why Izuku looked more like his father than his father. The only resemblance she saw between the two was their height. Hisashi stepped back from the door to let Mitsuki in and asked, "Yes, is she present?" Inko hardly ever left the house, so Mitsuki asked knowing the answer. "She never leaves," Hisashi said in a deep voice, "Of course she is. Since I returned, she has actually remained in our son's room. I'm at a loss for what to do. I adore Inko, but what she's doing to herself is wrong. She hardly eats and doesn't talk." With his orange eyes focused on Mitsuki's unspoken accusation, Hisashi said, "I'm thinking of having her committed." He ran his hand through his long red hair and added, "It hurts me to admit that there's nothing I can do for her besides watch her waste away. Inko hasn't spoken since that day at the hospital with your boy." Mitsuki twitched her fingers and said, "I apologize, but would it be okay if I spoke to her?" She inquired as she heard Hisashi sigh and saw the dazzling flame shoot out of his mouth. As he pointed toward Izuku's room, he said, "Sure, go ahead, it's not like you could make things any worse." Mitsuki bowed in appreciation and hurried down the hall, hearing the sound of a can being opened and its carbonation escaping into the air. She knocked on Izuku's door and received no response. She didn't even hear any movement inside. It was dark, with only a sliver of streetlight peeking through the curtains, and Mitsuki wondered, is she sleeping? Before getting hold of the knob and opening the door, Inko?" Mitsuki covered her mouth as she assessed her friend's condition. She called out, sliding her hand up and down the wall near the door until her fingers flipped the light switch, revealing Inko lying on the bed with her green eyes glazed over and her pupils barely contracting against the extra light. Inko was wearing a pink robe that was haphazardly tied around her body, showcasing how much weight she had lost since her son vanished. The once chubby woman was thin as a rail, her skin holding tightly to her frame. and her green hair was disheveled with knots and split ends. "Can you hear me, Inko?" "Everything is going downhill, Inko," Mitsuki said, taking a deep breath, "but even if you can't hear me, I feel like you would still be the best person to talk to about this." Mitsuki asked, hoping her friend wasn't dead, but the slight rise and fall of her chest let Mitsuki know she was still alive even though her eyes weren't. Mitsuki closed the door and went to the bed before sitting in front of the bed. When Katsuki eventually left the hospital, he even ran into some of his friends. I'm not sure what they said, but Katsuki seemed to benefit somewhat from it. When his teacher approached us and informed us that Katsuki could not be in the hero course, I was extremely appreciative of the children for helping my son. Katsuki simply accepted it while standing there, despite the fact that he was hurt. The memory made Mitsuki slap her thigh. I am aware that he is causing Inko pain, but I am powerless to stop it. I put on a brave front, but I've always respected you in situations like this. I came here because you were such a good mother, no matter what, you were always there for your son. Tell me how I can assist Katsuki, please, Inko. I beg you. Mitsuki wiped tears from her eyes as she looked at Inko and was shocked to actually see that Inko was looking at her too. Inko, you were listening? As Mitsuki continued to look at Inko, the green-haired woman began coughing. Inko. After a moment, Mitsuki realized that what she had assumed was coughing was actually laughter and moved to her friend's side. Inko was laughing. Inko's laughter became louder and more intense as Mitsuki watched her sit up. You think it's that easy, Mitsuki? What I'm trying to say is that you definitely do. For the Bakugo family, everything is simple. Everyone adored your son, who was an exceptional student with a strong personality, and you were always well liked. Even though I knew the truth, I said, look at Mitsuki, she's so pretty today, she's so strong, and she's such a good mother. You were a short-tempered bitch, and your son was a monster, a bully, and a show-off. Now you believe that everyone is against you because your son is finally receiving what he deserves. The blonde woman collapsed on the carpet, staring at her friend, and Inko glared at Mitsuki, saying, you make me sick. I never imagined that, Inko. Don't we have a friendship? Mitsuki asked, glancing at Inko as her friend's face lit up with a big smile. We are Mitsuki, of course, which is why I'm going to offer you some guidance. You are powerless to do anything. I completely understand how you feel. Your son is in such excruciating pain that there is nothing you can do but watch him suffer. You're fortunate that your son had friends who genuinely cared about him, Mitsuki, even though it seems like your heart is breaking more and more every day. Inko leaned forward and looked directly into Mitsuki's eyes, saying, you don't have what it takes to help your son. Izuku didn't have that. All he had was me. After just a few days of him being home, you're crying? For 10 years, I had to endure that same suffering, she yelled, got to her feet, and slapped Mitsuki, causing the woman to fall to the ground. You're mistaken if you're hoping for sympathy from me. I'm happy you're in pain, as is your bastard son. Mitsuki got out of her prone position and looked at Inko. She had never seen Inko lose her temper like this, but Mitsuki was short-tempered, and her fuse simply ran out. I only wish Izuku could be here to see what your son has wrought for himself. Inko, you can say whatever you want, but it won't matter because you are to blame for your son's weakness. With a mother like that, what more could you ask for? Mitsuki didn't feel good about insulting her friend, especially since she knew that Inko was in such a vulnerable state, but she couldn't just let Inko talk trash about her child. Did some of my hair get caught in my earrings? Mitsuki asked herself as she put a hand to her ear and pulled away when she felt something wet. Her palm was covered in blood, and then she felt the pain as she cupped both of her ears. She looked at Inko, and her eyes widened when she saw 2 bloody earrings in Inko's hands. She used her quirk to rip my earrings out. Mitsuki knew that Inko's quirk was something like telekinesis or levitation. Mitsuki, you're not such a pussy anymore? Mitsuki screamed and charged Inko, knocking her against the wall behind her and scratching at her face, her nails catching at the corner of her mouth and tearing it upwards as Inko pushed back, using the hooks on Mitsuki's earrings to scratch across her body. Hisashi rushed into the room, observing the 2 fighting women. Oh my god, Mitsuki, get out of here now, he yelled, separating the 2 women and placing himself between them. He shouted, staring at the blonde as he held back his unstable wife who was continually hurling curses at Mitsuki, who deciding to do as Hisashi said and left as the red-headed man did the hardest thing in his life. He called the police and had his wife committed that night. Looking at Inko in her room in the mental ward of the Musutafu hospital, she was forced into a straitjacket because she wouldn't stop picking at her stitches. Luckily Mitsuki hadn't pressed charges on his wife. He didn't want to have to deal with a lawsuit on top of this. He couldn't help but grimace at the stitches across his wife's mouth. He knew it was just the placement of the stitches, but it looked like Inko was smiling an inhumanely wide smile. It gave him the creeps really, but he knew his wife was in there somewhere and he'd do whatever he had to find her. I've already lost our son Inko, I can't lose you too. He whispered, placing his hand on the window of her door as Inko sat with her back facing him and quietly laughing. When the buses pulled out and came to the first stoplight, Denki saw something of interest and instantly alerted his partner in crime Mineta to it. When asked why, Kirishima said it was in remembrance of the wrong done to his friend. Months later, the classes of 1 and 2A were boarding the buses heading to the summer training camp, with the wounds from their internships and the loss of Bakugo having healed in some more than others. Kirishima looked out of his window, glaring at nothing in particular. When he saw the blonde bombshell, Mineta turned. She had long, light blonde hair that fell past her shoulders, and she was wearing a tight pink t-shirt, a short jean skirt, and sandals. Oh yeah, a definite 8 out of 10. Mineta gave his friend the thumbs up as the 1A girls noticed the girl on the corner. Momo, embarrassed by such shabby attire, remarked, "How shameless, to think she would go out dressed like that." With a finger to her chin, Suyu's only comment on the subject was, "Wow, she's bold." Yes, she is undoubtedly attempting to harm. Jiro began coughing as a young man approached the girl at the corner and, based on the greeting he received, he was her boyfriend because she threw herself against him and squeezed his muscular arm against her body. The man was over 6 feet tall, his dark green hair styled in a crew cut, and he was wearing jeans and red sneakers. He had a green t-shirt strained across his wide-barrel chest, his biceps stretching the shirt's sleeves to their limit. Jiro pounded her chest as she covered her blush, and many of the other girls on the bus stared at the blonde. What right does that gorgeous bastard have to have such a hot girlfriend and look that good? Blood poured down Mineta's face as he screamed. Denki shook his head and remarked, "Forget it, man. That guy has more testosterone in one strand of hair than all the guys on this bus combined." Mina, who was blushing even more, said, "Well, he certainly cuts one hell of a figure." The bus stopped at the light, allowing the couple to cross, and just as they got to the center of the crosswalk, the girl pulled the green-haired man to a stop and lowered his head for a passionate makeout session. EHHHHHHH. The sounds of the students' shock echoed throughout the bus. She did that in public as if it were nothing at all. Clasping her hands to her flushed face, Uraraka yelled. "That's what I refer to as a PDA. Go, girl." Prior to their bus driver honking at the couple, Mina yelled encouragement for their relationship. "Gosh, you fucking children," he yelled as the couple split up, the blonde girl waving at the bus as her boyfriend dragged her hurriedly across the street as it went by. "You bastard, I want your life," Mineta yelled as they sped away. Bane released Toga's hand and they continued walking down the sidewalk, Toga sticking her hand in his back pocket. "You shouldn't draw attention to us like that, Toga. Come on, Bane. You know it was your idea to scope those kids out anyhow, and that was enjoyable." She blushed and shook her head back and forth, but Toga was relieved that she was using the cover name he had chosen for public use. "I had to do something just as bold after all. You appearing before the kids we're going to kill is just so reckless I couldn't help myself," he said, holding a hand to her cheek. He smiled as he walked back to the bar to meet Tamura and Stain again, saying, "I just wanted to see their faces before you and the rest turn them into depictions of terror and pain. We might have another date night, so you could join us." Before Bane shook his head, Toga joyfully yelled. He smirked as he looked down at Toga and said, "Sorry, Toga, this will be on you and the others. I have other things to go and set up after all. This will be the final operation before the endgame. You look cute in that." Toga's face lit up like a stop sign as he said, "You should wear your hair down more often." "Why, you genuinely believe that?" "Ban, don't make fun of me," digging her fingernails into his arm, she said. As Toga skipped along behind him, Bane dismissed her and said, "I'm not, now come on, we have some finishing touches to set up." He then walked more quickly. Bane and Toga entered the mahjong bar and gazed at the 3 factions of the League of Villains, the villains that had gathered there. Tamura sat at the bar with Kurogiri behind him, setting a glass in front of Mr. Compress, who was standing next to Tamura along with Moonfish, Mustard, and Twice. Stain and his 2 acolytes, Dobby and Spinner, were positioned near the door, while the rest of his group were scattered throughout the rest of the bar. Magna was on the left wall, arranging her red hair in a compact, and Jack was sitting on one of the tables, balancing a chair on its back 2 legs. Tamura asked, getting up from his chair and glancing at Bane. "I needed to confirm that everything was proceeding as planned, and it is." As Toga jumped onto Jack's lap and started putting her hair up in her typical buns, Bane said, "The UA training camp is still going on." She wanted it to be something special between the two of them, but she would prefer to wear her hair down more because Bane said it suited her. In any case, we should go over the plan again. You're telling me that you're going to attack a class of children. How will that improve the hero's world? Exactly, Stain said as he moved forward. It doesn't matter if it detracts from the hero's image. Bane loudly drew back his chair to break up the ensuing argument, and Tamura swore, "Not everything is going to be about your stupid, change the world plan." Stain, Tamura has a point, but this also fits your objectives. If we can demonstrate to these students the valuelessness of the current generation, perhaps some true heroes will emerge among them. These students are the heroes of the future, but they are being taught by imposters and people who are not deserving of the title. In this respect, we would appreciate your acolyte's assistance. Bane looked at Stain, who nodded after giving it some thought. Think of them as moral compasses for the rest. After all, we wouldn't want to crush any diamonds in the rough by accident. He sat at the table that Tamura and Bane were occupying and said, "I understand what you mean very well. Dobby and Spinner will participate in this operation. Let's get started now that that is resolved. For the time being, we will allow the children to enjoy their small camp for a few days while the heroes have a chance to unwind. According to the information we were given, the students will be on Pussycat-owned private woodlands, so there won't be any concerns about reinforcements showing up. Along with 40 students, Eraserhead and Vlad King will be the only heroes outside of the Pussycats. Todoroki Shoto, Iida Tenya, and Tokiyami Fumikage are the top 3 students from the sports festival, so if anything happens to them, the public will crucify UA," Bane stated, removing 3 newspaper-cut photos. These 3 are the main objectives of this operation. Do you understand that the goal is to either kill or capture these 3? The assembled villains nodded in agreement when he asked them. I'm hoping this one survives. Tamura held up the photo of Todoroki and said, "Capture him at all costs." Bane shrugged, saying it didn't affect his plans. What makes him so unique? Gazing at Tamura, who rolled his eyes, Dobby posed the question. Tamura grinned viciously and remarked, "He won the sports festival, and he's the son of the number 2 hero, but most of all I like his eyes." "All right," Bane said, "Toga, Muscular, and Magna, you 3 will be involved in this operation," and the 3 nodded enthusiastically. All for One shouted from his TV screen, "If it isn't too much trouble, Bane, I would like to have one of your Nomu capture the hero Ragdoll." Bane detested the fact that he could never be certain when All for One was watching, but he still had to play the devoted soldier. He got up and nodded to his crew, saying, "As you wish." He said simply, "We'll meet back here in 5 days." He then left with his group, and as soon as they were out the door, Jack started to complain. "This is ridiculous, boss. Why must Croc and I remain behind like the unwanted stepchildren? Daddy, don't you love us?" Jack said, "Damn, you're good for a big guy, but I'll get you," as he leaned on Bane, who turned away from him knowing what he was planning. He informed the 2 of his plans for them, saying, "Listen closely, because I have another mission for you and Croc." For the past few days the training camp had been going according to the teacher's plans. The training was even more intense than it was at school, but Todoroki could handle it. He could handle anything to surpass his father using his mother's power, but right now he was doing this ridiculous test of courage. Honestly, he'd prefer to go back to the lodge and go to sleep, but here he was soloing the test of courage. 5 of his classmates were being held back for remedial classes, which left his class with only 15 students, so he'd been lucky enough to go through this alone. Class B was doing their best to try and scare Class A, and he had to admit seeing one of Class B's students pop their head out of the ground was rather startling, but nothing terrifying. As Todoroki walked, he began to hear the sounds of crashes and snapping trees. He began to speed up as he saw a massive plume of dust rise into the air. He rushed forward and at the last second managed to create a wall of ice to block a long piece of metal that would have no doubt sliced through him in an instant. Todoroki questioned, "Is this from all his training?" Before shaking his head, "No, Dark Shadow is on a rampage." The metal retreated from his wall and retreated into the mouth of the villain who was fighting a monstrous Tokiyami. Todoroki looked at Shoji and saw that one of his tendrils was bleeding. "Exactly," Shoji said, panting, "It's a good thing you're here, Todoroki. Maybe you can use your flames to settle Dark Shadow." "Who is that guy and what happened?" Todoroki inquired as he watched Tokiyami try to use his long teeth to slam the tooth villain, who deftly ducked into a nearby tree. "I don't know, but Tokiyami and I were strolling through the forest when he suddenly appeared. He was aiming for Tokiyami, but I was able to push him away with one of my dupli arms, losing it in the process. Tokiyami then called out Dark Shadow, but Dark Shadow lost it because he felt guilty about seeing me lose an arm. As they watched the two continue their battle, Shoji clarified, "It's not like the arm is gone forever or anything, but it does hurt." However, it was evident that Dark Shadow had the upper hand as he swatted Moonfish into a group of trees. The villain then launched more of his teeth at the Monster Shadow, who easily broke them before grabbing Moonfish and slamming him into the ground before slamming both of his large fists onto the villain. Todoroki slid ice towards Tokiyami, lit his left hand on fire right in front of him, and watched as his Monster Shadow retreated back inside of him. "Now's our chance," Todoroki said, and Tokiyami fell to the ground, panting and drenched in sweat, looking between Shoji and Todoroki. Todoroki placed a thick layer of ice over the top of the crater and approached the villain, who was unconscious and had most of his teeth broken or missing, saying, "Thank you, I'm sorry for the disturbance to our dark revelry. For the time being, that should hold him. We ought to return to the camp." The two villains in front of them, one of whom already had Pixie Bob under the base of his enormous weapon, terrified the remaining students who had not yet taken the courage test. "Good evening, students. We are the Vanguard Action Squad, the League of Villains. Who among you is a worthy her? I am Spinner, a disciple of the Great Stain." Iida was standing there when Spinner was about to finish when he was kicked in the face by a motorized device, sending him sprawling back in the dust. "That murderous psychopath has no redeeming qualities. I'll defeat you and my brother the hero Ingenium to exact revenge. This kid is ridiculously fast. If I remember correctly, this is the student who stopped Big Bro Bane's attack on USJ. I better take him out now." Iida yelled as Tiger and Mandalay hurried to shield him from Magna, who was swinging his magnet at him. However, before Magna could get through, Iida was tackled by Mandalay, causing Magna to miss as Tora delivered a cat punch directly to his face, knocking him back as he dropped his magnet. "I'm the villain you'll have to deal with. You'll be up against Wild Pussycats Tiger," Tiger remarked as he started to spar with Magna. Spinner got to his feet, spitting out a few teeth, and pulled out his enormous sword, gazing at Mandalay and Iida. "Stains will determine how you are all judged." Rushing forward with his sword of clustered blades, he yelled. With limited time, Mandalay moved Iida with her and evaded Spinner's attack by sending a brief telepathic message to the entire camp. As an unidentified girl emerged from the woods wearing a mask and a device on her back, Suyu, who had been paired with Ochako during the test of courage, stood beside her friend. Mandalay's message was read to the camp at that precise moment. "Everyone take note. The camp has been attacked by the League of Villains. Every student, hurry as quickly as you can to the lodge and avoid interacting with the villains." She hurried towards Ochako with a knife, saying, "Well, looks like the cat's out of the bag. Oh well, most of you are going to die anyway." However, Sue's tongue whipped the brunette out of her way, cutting her tongue in the process. "Wow, that was pretty fast. You must be a hit with the guys. I'm Himiko Toga, girlfriend of Bane. Do you two want to be my friends? You'd both look so cute covered in blood." Ochako retracted her tongue, swallowing the metallic taste of her own blood, and Sue let her go, placing her behind her. Sue jumped forward and said, "Get out of here, Ochako. I'll hold her off." However, Toga threw her syringe, impaling Sue's hair to a tree and stopping the frog girl cold. Ochako said, "Sue, are you okay?" as Toga approached Sue. Toga stroked Sue's blood-stained lip and said, "So your name is Sue, nice to meet you." Despite her impaled hair, Asui remarked, "Only my friends call me Sue." Toga was about to stab Sue when Ochako rushed forward and grabbed Toga's hand. "Guess that means we're friends now. Great," Toga said. She had turned to Ojiro, the only person she knew who was knowledgeable about combat, after losing in the sports festival and being unable to visit Gunhead's agency to learn about it. After all, he had taught her some fundamental skills and had been able to compete on his own in the conflagration zone. Activating her quirk, she doubled her grip and spun, tossing Toga over her shoulder. As the villain slashed across her back, Toga floated into the air. Sue said, "Ochako, you're hurt," as she yanked the knife out of her hair, fell to the ground, and hurried to Ochako's side after noticing that her back was discolored by the blood that was streaming from the cut. "I can't move right, which is terrible." As she peered over the treetops and noticed 3 figures approaching, Toga pondered. She threw her syringe into a tree and pulled herself into the surrounding treetops, saying, 5-on-1 isn't in my favor, I better go check on Plasmus." Muscular stood on the edge of a cliff and gazed at the opposing clouds of smoke. That mustard kid was the cause of one, and that patchwork guy with his blue flames was the cause of the other. As he rounded the cliffside, he remarked, "That's a stupid name. Mustard. The boss told me to stop worrying about the 3 targets and just go ahead and cut loose. The teachers were supposed to be taken out by that Dobby guy and me, but I'll kill someone anyhow." He saw a small child standing on the edge of the cliff and thought. When he asked, well, what do we have here?" The child turned around and displayed his spiked work cap. He reached out and grabbed the child by the head, who wriggled in his grasp before launching a waterspout in Muscular's face, saying, "Nice hat, kid, let me see that." As Muscular sprayed him with more water, Koda yelled in his face, "I know who you are. You killed my parents." Muscular grinned. As he put on his hat, he dropped Koda and said, "Oh, you're the water hoses kid, right?" Muscular took Koda by the shirt and held him over the edge of the cliff, saying, "TCH too small, but you were right kid, I killed your mommy and daddy and they took my right eye, I'd say we're even, but if you want to see them that bad I'll help you." He just let go and said, "Tell your folks I said hi." Before Koda struck the first branch and everything went dark, he last saw Muscular's happy face. Before leaping off the cliff, Muscular grinned at the mayhem in the forest and asked, "Don't you kids know there are monsters in the dark? Everyone take note. The cam has been attacked by the League of Villains. Every student, hurry as quickly as you can to the lodge and avoid interacting with the villains." A bright blue flame suddenly burst in Eraserhead's face as he hurried outside to help the students. Only his lightning-fast reflexes allowed him to dodge the flame and put an end to his opponent's trick. Before Eraserhead landed on him and wrapped him in his scarf, Dobby said, "Nice one, Eraser. I wonder if your students are as good." The scarf then tore the man in two, causing him to fall to the mud. "Why are they pursuing the children?" "What?" Eraserhead asked. Eraserhead killed Dobby's clone and hurried back into the room. Unbeknownst to either teacher, Kirishima had been creeping toward the wall before running towards it after hardening, crashing through the window, and taking off into the night. "Vlad, I need you to stay here and protect the students. I'll go out and try to lead everyone back here. I'm sure the students are their main objective, so it's best we get all of them back here as soon as possible." Eraserhead exclaimed, "Damn it. Kirishima," as he fled after his errant pupil, who had already vanished into the shadowed forest. "This is my opportunity because if the League is present, they will be aware of Bane's location. I can determine whether Bakugo was correct if I can get one of them to tell me where Bane is." As he hurried through the forest, Kirishima heard crashes overhead and pondered. He saw a body falling toward him when he looked up. He rushed forward out of instinct and caught the falling form, only to discover it was the pussycat's child. His eyes were closed, his chest was hardly moving, his arms were broken, and scraps covered his entire body. He looked terrible. He turned toward the classroom and said, Hey kid, are you alright? What happened?" He ought to return him there, but if he did, he would be unable to obtain his desired outcome. Something hit the ground behind him at that precise moment, and he exclaimed, "What am I thinking? This kid is dying. I need to get back to the tea." When Kirishima turned around again, he saw a big, muscular blonde standing before him. Muscular said as he emerged from the tiny hole in the ground, "Well, I had intended to come down here and see how much of a mess that kid had made, but instead I find you." Kirishima was well acquainted with this man. He had investigated Bane and his group thoroughly and discovered a leaked security tape from the prison break, in which the man was seen standing directly next to Bane. Kirishima, who already knew the answer, placed Koda gently on the ground next to a tree, away from the two of them. "I guess it's out of the question that you're going to let me walk away and get this kid help, right?" he asked. Muscular said, laughing at Kirishima, "Don't worry kid, I'll protect you like a man," while he used his quirk to move his arms and legs. As Kirishima hardened, crossing his arms in front of him, absorbing the full force of Muscular's fist, and sliding along the ground, making two large furrows, Muscular yelled, "You'd be correct there. I've been given a mission by the boss to kill as many of you that aren't on the list as possible, and you've already messed that up by saving that kid there, so I'll have to kill you both." Muscular rushed forward. His skin held up well, but his arms were trembling from the shock of such a powerful blow. He had been undergoing the most rigorous training to strengthen his hardening ever since Bane had so carelessly broken it. Muscular noticed that the skin had been scraped off his knuckles and shook his hand. "Wow, tough stuff there kid, you might actually be fun to fight." In the same way that Kirishima hardened his hands and ran forward, Muscular took the hit and watched as the child tore through his muscle fibers without even approaching his main body. He raised his fist in the air and brought it down on Kirishima's head, spitting out his black hair, which pierced Muscular's fist as he was driven into the ground like a nail. Blood spilled from his nose as he gritted his teeth before hurling clawed fingers forward and tearing through Muscular's fibers. In order to strike hard, I must put these things out of the way. I only need to knock him down so that the child and I can leave. I don't need to win. Grinning, Muscular cocked his foot back and drove it forward into Kirishima's hardened stomach, pushing him backwards. Unlike before, though, Muscular didn't budge and kept punching at Kirishima's body, pushing him backwards. He's going to use up all of my hardening like this, damn it. I have to beat this guy, shit. But Kirishima wasn't nearly as strong as Muscular, whose shirt ripped open to reveal multiple layers of muscle that powered his blow down on Kirishima, who felt the bones in his arm give as they broke and he was driven deep into the ground. Muscular raised his hands above him and drove down on Kirishima, who took that moment to punch upward, both of them crashing into one another. Ha ha ha, nice one kid, you're pretty good, but not good enough. Kirishima jumped up just as Muscular was finishing his sentence, kicking the giant villain back as he covered his bloody face with his spiked hair. Kirishima sprinted as quickly as he could to Koda. "I got ya!" he exclaimed as he ran, but before he knew it, Muscular's fist was in his back, driving him down. Kirishima was forced to drop Koda or else he would fall on him. However, Mr. Aizawa caught Koda as he was flying through the air and assessed the situation. He yelled, "I'll thank you to get off of my student," as Muscular got to his feet, blood dripping from multiple facial punctures onto the unconscious Kirishima. As he kicked Kirishima to the side and watched his body slam into a tree and fall to the ground, Muscular remarked, "Well damn, I didn't expect to see you here. The boss was pretty clear that I shouldn't take you on. But the boss isn't here and you're at a disadvantage. You have two half-dead kids here, so what are you going to do?" Kirishima stood up, his whole body jagged and hard, as a loud crunching and cracking sound came from his left. Thinking of Bakugo, Kirishima stepped forward and said, "I can handle this, Mr. Aizawa, after all I'm the sturdy hero Red Riot." Unbreakable. Kirishima's heart was plastered with the dejected and hurt expression on his friend's face. When Kirishima ran forward and collided with Muscular, she yelled, "Bane hurt my friend, he stole his future, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen to anyone else," and held him there. Aizawa was caught between saving Koda and leaving his student to a villain who was beyond his capabilities. If he stayed, Koda would undoubtedly perish. "Go, Mr. Aizawa, that kid needs help," Aizawa said. Muscular backed up slowly as he gritted his teeth and used his quirk to cause his fibers to fall away. Before the light from his eyes faded, he pushed farther into the forest and yelled, "This is all I can do, Kirishima. I'll be back." Kirishima grinned as he cocked his fist back and plowed it into Muscular's side, knocking him to the ground as he mounted his barrel chest and punched him repeatedly. "All I have to do is knock him out so I can restrain him and obtain the information I require regarding Bane." When Muscular's quirk came back to life, he smiled and punched upward beneath Kirishima's chin. He heard the satisfying click of his teeth smashing together, sending Kirishima skyward, and then he leapt into the air and grabbed Kirishima's face. Muscular was losing consciousness. Even though Muscular's face was a picture of brutality, bruising, puncture marks, missing teeth, and a crushed prosthetic eye, he maintained a malicious smile. As he drove it into Kirishima's stomach once, twice, and 3 times while observing cracks form along his abdomen, he said, "You missed your shot, kid, now it's my turn." His arm tripled in size. He yelled, "You're too soft, kid," and struck Kirishima with his fist once more, watching as blood spurted from Kirishima's mouth between his fingers as he was pushed to the ground. As he fell to the ground and approached Kirishima's prone body, Muscular grinned. He raised his boot above Kirishima and said, "I guess you're not so unbreakable after all." However, a jet of blue flame cut him off from Kirishima before he could complete the task. Muscular turned to face Dabi, who was approaching him. Standing in front of Muscular, Dabi declared, "He's proven himself a hero and in accordance with Stain's will he lives." Muscular snarled, "Unless you want to go through me." He then turned away from Dabi and pursued Eraserhead. Dabi shrugged as he walked over to meet Twice after glancing over his shoulder. "I was certain he was going to tear you to pieces. There's no way you'd burn him to a crisp," was yelled Twice with a thumbs up. Dabi said as he left, "Just make another clone and send it after that idiot." When Toga finally fell to the ground and started to walk, she heard a squelch and realized she was getting close as she rounded a group of trees and came across Bane's Nomu, whom he had named Plasmus. This suggests that Toga was out of range of Ochako's quirk. From those porn comics, it resembled one of those slime monsters. It had 2 sickly yellow-green glowing eyes, was maroon, almost purple, and a bloody, struggling rag doll in its moist, slimy fist. Plasmus just gurgled softly and started pushing Ragdoll into its stomach, saying, "Good boy Plasmus, Bane is going to be so proud of you." Toga grabbed her syringe and plunged it into Ragdoll's thigh, saying, "Wait, hold on there Slimy, I need something from her first." With Plasmus holding her motionless, Toga then stripped the hero of her costume. As Ragdoll was absorbed into Plasmus's body, she smiled brightly and said, "There we go, I think this might come in handy." Plasmus then started to walk away. Toga licked her lips, started drinking from her syringe, and took off her current outfit, which was only a portion of her actual costume that she had stashed away close by, before putting on Ragdoll's costume. "Bye. Thanks for the hard work." Kurogiri glanced between Bane and Tamura and asked, "So how do you think things are going?" No stain had bothered to appear. Bane gave a shrug. As Tamura swirled his glass, he propped his feet up on the table and said, "We'll find out soon enough." He drank his drink and crunched on the single piece of ice in the glass, saying, "What he said, these are high-level villains, we went through a lot to get them together, there's no way they'll fail." While Bane could only think that Croc and Jack should be almost finished with their missions and couldn't help but smile, Kurogiri nodded, pleased to see that Tamura was behaving like a legitimate villain. Check all for one is the rule.
I will continue this story in next part. Till then, bye bye.